this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Then she says, have you seen a photo of my son? And I'm like, who is this person?
Welcome to the Boys and Girls Podcast. Arranged marriage is basically a reality show, and you're auditioning for your soulmate. And who's judging? Only your entire family? I sacrificed myself to this ancient tradition, hoping to find love the right way. And instead, I found chaos, comedy, and a lot of cringe. Listen to Boys and Girls on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You know Roald Dahl. He thought up Willy Wonka and the BFG. But did you know he was a spy? In the new podcast, The Secret World of Roald Dahl, I'll tell you that story and much, much more.
What?
You probably won't believe it either.
Was this before he wrote his stories? It must have been.
Okay, I don't think that's true.
I'm telling you, the guy was a spy. Listen to The Secret World of Roald Dahl on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, son. Time to put out this campfire.
Dad, we learned about this in school.
Oh, did you now? Okay. What's first?
Smokey Bear said to.
First, drown it with a bucket of water, then stir it with a shovel.
Wow, you sound just like him.
Then he said,
if it's still warm, then do it again.
Where can I learn all this?
It's all on SmokeyBear.com with other wildfire prevention tips. Because only you can prevent wildfires.
Brought to you by the USDA Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
When segregation was a law, one mysterious black club owner, Charlie Fitzgerald, had his own rules.
Segregation in the day, integration at night.
It was like stepping on another world.
Was he a businessman, a criminal, a hero?
Charlie was an example of power. They had to crush him.
Charlie's Place, from Atlas Obscura and Visit Myrtle Beach. Listen to Charlie's Place on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Cool Zone Media.
Hey everyone, Robert Evans here, and we're doing a rerun episode because I need the time to get caught up. But I figured we'd do this week, we'd rerun 2 of our old episodes, cut out a bunch of extra ads and put them in as long single episodes on a couple of topics that are very important. First off, we're going to be talking about the Department of Homeland Security, which as an organization is as bastardy a bastard as we have ever discussed on this show. So here, please listen up to a series of episodes that have unfortunately only gotten more relevant as time has gone on.
You know, introducing a podcast is a little bit like making love. It's not. It's not at all. I'm so sorry. I'm Robert Evans, failing to introduce my podcast yet again. It's Behind the Bastards. It's about terrible people. I'm so sorry, everyone. I was trying to open with my folksy wisdom, but I have none. And now I've botched the start of this episode. Here to attempt to take away some of my shame is Caitlin Durante. Caitlin, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm just barely keeping it together at any moment. But otherwise,
Caitlin,
okay.
Can you think of any similarities between introducing a podcast and making love?
Well, let me think about that.
Oh, I have one.
Okay, yeah.
Well. The audio levels can go up and down.
The audio levels can go up and down. That's a good similarity, Sophie.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Maybe an entire episode, not just introducing an episode, but an entire episode, I think you could draw some parallels between. Because you've got, there's like the intro is sort of like the foreplay, and then you've got, usually a big climactic finish to the episode.
Well, there you go, everybody.
We figured it out.
You wanted to compare a random episode of my podcast about bad people to making love. Caitlin Durante has kind of made it easier. Maybe. Caitlin, how are you doing today?
I'm all right. I'm just...
You're in your closet recording.
I'm in my closet.
You're in your closet. I'm looking at your luggage right now.
Mm-hmm.
Nice luggage. I see you go with the hard shell.
Thank you. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It is a really nice closet, if I remember from the photos you sent me. Like it's a very good sized closet.
It truly is. Thank you so much.
You want to hear a little story about me, Caitlin?
Please.
Because I'm a narcissist. Okay. So, I travel a lot too, Caitlin, and I have refused my entire traveling life to have like a hard-shelled rolly suitcase, even though they're much more comfortable to use at the airport than a backpack. Because as a young man with an indestructible spine, I was like, only stupid old people use the rolly backpacks. I'm gonna be a young adventurer forever, and I just get to wear a backpack. And now I just hurt myself every time I go to the airport out of pride, and that's why men shouldn't be allowed to hold political office.
I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, you mean you carry around one of those like big like backpacking?
Yeah, big old
things, just,
backpacking
like, on your
backpack.
Wow, yeah,
horrible. Sometimes I carry a duffel bag, even worse.
That's absurd.
Yeah, it's a terrible idea. But it does tie in with the theme of today's episode, because what do you do with backpacks and rolly suitcases, Caitlin?
I mean, you bring them with you to travel.
You bring them with you to cross
borders.
Yeah, and today we're talking about La Motherfucking Migra, the Border Patrol.
Oh boy!
Wow,
Yay.
Caitlin, I just want to say, nice job.
Yeah,
that was great.
Thanks.
It's been a long journey to starting the episode this week, but I think we got there nicely. Yeah, sorry to everyone who's been, this has been a little bit of a weird run of Behind the Bastards, the Uprising episodes. We're still going to be doing the dictators and grifters, that are our bread and butter. But I keep getting obsessed with different law enforcement agencies, particularly the ones, shooting at me. And so I started just kind of reading a bunch about Customs and Border Patrol this last week or so, and I couldn't stop. And so I wrote a lot about them, and now we're all going to talk about Border Patrol. Because, Caitlin, did you know the Border Patrol kind of problematic?
Wait a minute. What do you mean?
Yeah, not nice dudes, as it turns out, and have kind of been dicks for like 100-something years. Or like 100 years. They've been dicks for a long time, very close to 100 years.
Okay,
like
I'm listening.
96 years.
All right.
Yeah. Which, they still have time to change. A lot of people have their best, their second act after age 96.
Yeah, I would say that applies to a large number of people.
A lot of tortoises, at least. A lot of tortoises go on to do very cool things after age 96.
Yeah, trees as well. There's a lot of old trees that are doing really important things.
Border Patrol could be like a sequoia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I don't know how likely I think that is. So we're going to talk about La Migra today because they're terrible, and I don't think most people know how terrible they are. And their terribility is important because it is tied in with a lot of horrible things about this country and the very concept of whiteness. So how are you feeling about that, Caitlin?
I don't feel good about it. I really don't.
That's good, because my cunning plan has been to blame you personally for all of the historical crimes of the U.S. Border Patrol.
Well, I did invent them.
You launched the Immigration Act of 1924. That's Caitlin Durante's... That's
Sorry,
on your resume.
I didn't want that to be my legacy, but here we are.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know this, but you used to be all of Congress in the early 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty impressive when you think about it.
Yeah, no, it really is. Yeah, Congress Durante.
Yeah, you were instead of Caitlin, you were Congress Durante.
That's true.
If we're going to talk about the Border Patrol, we've got to talk about the border. And given that the territory we currently know as like Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and even Mexico is all land that was stolen from indigenous people, this is not like a case where there's a lot of good guys to choose from. If you're talking about like conflicts over the U.S.-Mexican border, you're talking about like a bunch of different states that kind of sucked fighting each other for land that wasn't theirs. Like that's the whole deal, right?
Yes.
So the U.S.-Mexican War of 1846 to 1848 is the conflict that gained our nation most of the modern Southwest. It was a naked war of imperialist aggression against another nation that brutally subjugated indigenous peoples. One can argue that Mexico was like a broadly better country than the U.S. at this point, since it didn't allow slavery, but both countries not great to anyone, any like indigenous peoples or whatever. Just bad governments. So at the end of the U.S.-Mexican War, the United States wound up occupying Mexico City, and that nation was forced to cede 50% of its northern territory in the resulting treaty. And I think a lot of Americans who grow up kind of outside of the Southwest don't really have a clear idea of how much land the United States got as a result of the U.S.-Mexican War, but we took a shitload of land from Mexico. It's fucking crazy how much of this country used to be Mexico, like up into Oklahoma.
Yeah, I don't have a good gauge on that because I grew up in Pennsylvania, and that just wasn't something that they bothered to tell us in history class.
Yeah, we went like most of the Southwest was kind of at one point or another part of Mexico. And so, yeah, we took about 50% of Mexico's northern territory, and a new U.S.-Mexican border was redrawn along the Rio Grande from the Gulf to El Paso, and then along more or less an arbitrary line further west up the Pacific. Now, this meant that a huge number of people who'd previously lived in Mexico and had been able to travel freely around territory that was all part of one nation now found themselves living in between two nations. This included roughly 180,000 members of indigenous tribes, as well as about 150,000 Mexicans. So these 300,000-ish non-white folks owned most of the land in like the territories in the Southwest that, you know, became Texas and some of the surrounding states. And the decades after the U.S.-Mexican War are kind of best viewed as a gradual process of white people taking this land from non-white people. Some of it through purchase, some of it through like violent threats and intimidation, some of it as a result of the reservation system kicking indigenous people off of their ancestral land, and some of it through just like good old fashioned genocide, Caitlin. Just like really getting your boots in it, you know?
I mean, those are the main principles that the U.S. was founded on, right? White people stealing land from non-white people and genociding them.
You're gosh darn right, Caitlin. You're gosh darn right. And that's why when I get up I'm just thinking of like a Folgers coffee commercial. You know, one of those old ones where it's like a cowboy getting up on the range, sipping a Folgers coffee and then just like stepping into a pile of bones and just being like, nothing like a nice morning walking barefoot through a pile of bones. The thing that I do every day as a cowboy.
Yeah, why wasn't that their ad campaign for Folgers?
Folgers. We'll murder everybody. Coffee helps. I was drinking coffee and it went down the wrong hole, Caitlin.
Oh, no.
Wow.
See, coffee can't be stopped from attempting genocide.
Even coffee wants to murder.
Coffee wants nothing but to murder. So, as we discussed in our last episode of the Behind the Police miniseries that we just did, the Texas Rangers was kind of the first border patrol type force in, you know, the Southwest. And they began their history as a group, like a paramilitary organization to protect white settlers in Texas. They were formed by a local mayor named John Jackson Tumlinson, who was part of the old 300 white families who first settled in Texas with Stephen F. Austin. Now, it wasn't a popular decision for these 300 families to settle in Texas, and the Comanches, Tonkawas, Apaches, and Karankawas, who already resided in the area, got kind of angry and started murdering them. So Tumlinson ordered the formation of a roving defensive patrol. This patrol became the Texas Rangers, but Tumlinson never got to see it formed because he was almost immediately killed by Karankawa and Huaco indigenous people before he got off the ground.
Well, that sounds like karma to me.
Yeah, it sounds like it's fine. Like, a shame they didn't get more people. So, the Rangers were kind of this country's first border patrol force, and the primary method of action for them was just, again, really just straight up genocide. In the early days, they were like a paramilitary army. They acted as scouts for actual militias. They would swoop in and force indigenous people out of their homes and onto reservations, but would also just burn their villages sometime and murder their women and children. Because, you know, whatever. Sometimes you come into the office and you want to do things different. I don't know. Yeah, they also engaged in the murder and intimidation of Mexicans in border communities, and by the early 1900s, the indigenous folks had mostly been forced off of their land, and the Rangers had become a police force focused mainly on Mexicano communities on the border. The primary strategy was what's known to historians as revenge by proxy, and for an example of how that looked, I'm going to quote from the American Crossroads book, Migra. Quote, On June 12th, 1901, a Mexicano rancher named Gregorio Cortez stood at the gate of his home in Carones County, Texas. There he resisted arrest for a crime that he did not commit. The sheriff persisted, drew his gun, and shot Gregorio's brother in the mouth when he charged at the sheriff to protect Gregorio. Gregorio shot back and killed the sheriff, an act that was sure to bring the Texas Rangers to his doorstep. When they came, Gregorio and his family, including his wounded brother, were gone. All that remained was the dead body of the sheriff. The news of Gregorio's deadly defiance quickly spread across southern Texas. For 10 days, the Texas Rangers and posses numbering up to 300 men hunted for him. When they could not find him, they sought revenge by proxy, arresting, brutalizing, and murdering an unknown number of Mexicanos. So that's like how the Texas Rangers kind of worked for a while, is a Hispanic person commits a crime or a perceived crime, and if they can't catch him to murder him publicly, they just kill a bunch of other random Mexicans so that like people don't get uppity. That's the first Border Patrol.
Horrible.
Pretty bad, Caitlin. Pretty bad.
Don't like it. I don't like it one bit.
Okay, so you are on the record now about not being in favor of murdering random people as part of a fear-based a system of law enforcement.
Yes, and I am happy to be on the record as taking that stance.
That's a bold stance. That's a bold stance. Gonna lose you some advertisers, Caitlin, especially our big advertiser, Raytheon.
Yeah.
When you really need a group of people intimidated by violence, there's no other option but Raytheon. Raytheon.
It's not even
Let
time.
a robot
It's not
do it.
even time for an ad break. You're just doing this.
I know
for fun.
that's a free one. Raytheon just had to lay off a lot of employees, Sophie, and I for one have a sense of loyalty, so I'm trying to help Raytheon out with some free ads. So look, if you've got a couple billion extra dollars that you need to spend on missiles that are filled with knives in order to assassinate, insurgent leaders in Yemen, look, don't go to Lockheed Martin. Go to Raytheon, okay? It's just better knife missiles, right? That's all I'm going to say.
Mm-hmm.
Brave.
I have a sense of loyalty. So, for the first 20 years of the century, the U.S.-Mexican border was policed by a mix of Texas Rangers and, local sheriffs. Such enforcement was always piecemeal, with hundreds of miles of borderland operating basically autonomously, as it had for generations. The idea that we would police our border didn't exist until pretty recently. For most of American history, it was just well, yeah, you've got this big empty chunk of country, and eventually it becomes Mexico, and nobody really gives a shit. Yeah, you see, all these communities had existed for forever, for hundreds of years in a lot of cases, and they had family who would be up in Mexico or up in the United States, and it would have seemed like madness to try to split these communities up based on an arbitrary borderline that nobody could even see.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, in the 1920s, that started to change. In 1924, the Immigration Act was passed, and the Immigration Act banned all immigration to the United States from Asia, and it massively reduced immigration in from Southern and Eastern Europe. The goal of the act was for the first time to enshrine in law the federal government's preference for Nordic whites above non-white people when it came to immigration. So basically set up a quota system.
Yikes.
Yeah, have you heard about this? This is when we decided that only one kind of white people were allowed in the country. This is the Italians aren't white enough law.
Mm-hmm.
But people used to really care about that, right? In the 1924 Immigration Act, a big part of it was stopping Italians, or as they would have called them, Italians, which used to be, I think, more racist than it is, and is now just a funny old-timey way of making fun of Italians, which I'm always in favor of, Caitlin. How do you feel about Italians?
You do know that my last name is Durante and that I am partly Italian.
Yeah, so am I. Yeah. That's why it's okay.
Good. All right. Awesome.
Yeah. Are we white? How's that work?
I have heard slightly varying things, but I think by and large, Italian people are considered white. Yes.
I was looking at a Nazi cartoon the other day because I do things like that for my mental health. And it was the point it was making is that social justice advocates are always white and fascists are actually really diverse. And so it was a bunch of white people lecturing Hitler, Mussolini, and Hirohito. But because it was drawn by a fascist, they drew in Mussolini as a black man because they don't think
Oh.
Italians are white. So it's just like there were a lot of layers of wrongness there to parse through. It was one of those things that looked very confusing to people who don't immediately recognize, oh, these are the kind of racists who don't even think Italians count as white. It's very funny. But in the 1920s, that was all of Congress.
Sure.
And they were like, we got to pass a law to stop these Italians from coming in. So yeah, the Immigration Act of 1924 bans all Asian immigration and tries to kind of restrict to only the right kind of white people. And the one real exception to this, the only kind of like non-white folks who were allowed into the country under the Immigration Act without any kind of restriction were Mexicans. And this is because of hardcore labor or lobbying by the agricultural industry, right? Because like basically you had all these ranchers and farmers in Texas particularly and in the Southwest who were like, our entire industry doesn't work without these people, so you have to let them in. So the 1924 Act does kind of make an exception for that. It's very heavily based on race science, and in fact, like a big factor in what got the act passed was a bunch of bogus studies conducted by the Eugenics Research Office at Cold Spring Harbor that kind of provided intellectual justification for the law by arguing that the wrong kind of immigrants would lead to surges in violent crime and declines in IQ.
Yikes,
so
don't like the sound of that.
No, this is bad. This is bad. And the 1924 Immigration Act is what establishes the U.S. Border Patrol for the very first time. So this fundamentally racist law written by people who justified it explicitly with race, like bad race science, is where the Border Patrol is initially established. So literally born in an orgy of racism. And in fact, the 1924 Immigration Act that established the Border Patrol was so nakedly racist that Adolf Hitler took inspiration from it. Yeah, it's bad. It's really bad, Caitlin. This is where Border Patrol comes from.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's not great. In 1928, Hitler wrote this of the law. There is currently one state in which one can observe at least a weak beginnings of a better conception. This is, of course, not Germany, but the American Union. The American Union categorically refuses the immigration of physically unhealthy elements and simply excludes the immigration of certain races.
So wait, Hitler in the 20s took a look at what we were doing in the U.S. and was like, I like the looks of that. Let me copy-paste and do that.
Yeah,
in Nazi
that's exactly
Germany.
what happened. That's exactly what happened.
Oh dear.
And he wrote extensively about how inspired he was by U.S. immigration law, which was like the most racist in the world at the time.
Holy shit.
You want to know something else cool, Caitlin? This is a neat story. You're going to love this.
Please tell me the story.
You know, El Paso, great town, solid tacos. A lot of immigration into El Paso, right? Always has been, because it's the pass, right? You know, that's just where it's located.
Sure.
Back in like the 20s and 30s, when immigrants would come in, racist white people were so worried about how dirty they thought Mexicans were that they would mandate delousing baths for everybody who entered the country. And they would just douse them in pesticide. And the pesticide that they chose was Zyklon B.
Wait, what is that?
That's what they killed all the Jews with in the concentration camps. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's another thing the Nazis were like, oh, this seems like something we could modify a little bit to make better for us. Isn't that cool? That's good stuff. It's not.
Holy shit.
It was super flammable, and sometimes people burnt horribly to death. Good stuff.
Yikes.
On the border. Kind of always a nightmare. Kind of, if you study the history of the border, maybe the only reasonable conclusion is that borders are fundamentally toxic. But
and completely made up. They're just
and total bullshit.
Constructs of like horrible, usually racist ideology.
They're just racist lines we draw on a map that murder tons of people. It's awesome. It's really good. So yeah, the Border Patrol comes out of is formed from a law that the Nazis look at and go, "That's a good law," says we the Nazis. Sweet stuff, Caitlin. Yeah. So because the Immigration Act was passed alongside a surge of racist nativist fear about those dastardly non-white immigrants, it mandated that the new Border Patrol be established quickly. The first version of the force was basically built overnight from May 28th to July 1st, so rapidly that there was no time for the patrol to actually create any kind of qualification exam for its new recruits. The first wave of men to wear the service's green uniform were instead required to pass the Railway Mail Clerk Civil Service exam, which I'm sure is basically the same thing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So as a result, and this is something we'll talk about in part 2, this winds up being a long trend in the Border Patrol, is every decision they make, they have to like immediately adopt it, and they never have time to train anybody to do the job that they're going to do. And everyone's just fine with this, and it persists for 96 years.
So the whole thing, every like decisions are made all willy-nilly, people are brought in.
Yeah.
With no training.
No
things
training.
Are being implemented with
nobody knows what they're doing.
Basically no thought given to it. They're just like,
rules.
Here's what we decided, and we're not going to take a second to examine this at all. We're just going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, the current DHS secretary, Chad Wolf, has no law enforcement experience, was never in the military, and I think went to college on like a tennis scholarship. So it's great. It's cool how things are always exactly the same forever. Because, yeah, again, if people ever learn a single lesson from history, the world will explode. So we have to not do that. Anyway.
But there's also a conundrum there too, right? Because so much of history that gets taught, at least in schools, is so horribly whitewashed and revisionist that, like, how can anyone learn anything from it? You know?
Yeah.
Anyway.
You know, that's a good point, Caitlin. And that's why, as I see all these kids in the street who just aren't going to school anymore and are instead spending their nights drop-kicking the doors of a federal courthouse to try to taunt the agents inside to attack them, I think probably fine. Probably learning about as much, right?
True.
So, the very first Border Patrolmen were mostly mail clerks. And obviously, mail clerks maybe aren't super meant to be tromping around the desert hunting people. And about a quarter of everyone in the Border Patrol quit in their first month of the job. Turnover remained incredibly high for basically the whole history of the organization, but particularly its early years. And this made it kind of impossible for it to develop any kind of functional internal culture at the start. By 1927, the Border Patrol had been forced to hire inspectors who could not even pass civil service exams. The agency tried desperately to recruit military veterans and men with law enforcement experience, but the vast majority of their new hires were just unemployed men who lived in border towns. These were white working-class folks who'd had trouble keeping a job and were kind of desperate for a leg up and the regular income that a law enforcement career would allow, as well as kind of the respect and pride or respect that you would get as a member of law enforcement, right? Like they wanted some power. These were like poor working class whites.
Don't give anybody power. It never goes well.
No, especially not poor white men in the country.
Right.
Yeah. So immigration from Mexico into the United States had not traditionally been like a major subject of national political debate. People in Texas, you know, there were folks who cared about it, but like really on a national level, if you'd like run based on your plan to build a wall around Mexico, 99% of Americans have been like, what the fuck is your problem? Mm-hmm. Like, why do you give a shit about that?
Right.
Everyone is dying of diphtheria and the economy is permanently crashed. Please stop. Which I guess now we're back at, so maybe that'll help.
I mean, wow, the parallels.
I don't hear as many people giving a shit about the border these days, I'll say that much.
That's true.
But maybe it's because nobody wants to come here anymore. We did it, Caitlin. We finally stopped it.
Just turn the U.S. into a disease-ridden hellhole.
Yeah. All it took was a runaway plague that we completely give up any hope of ever dealing with.
Yay.
You know what? President Trump figured it out. Good for him.
You know what President Trump didn't figure out?
Oh, the products and services that support this podcast? That's right. We keep them a secret from the president.
Yeah.
But if you listen in it can be a secret that you and I share and hide at all costs from the administration.
Almost 30 years together, 4 kids, and some of reality TV's most unforgettable moments, we know a thing or two about living life out loud. We're taking you behind the scenes in our new podcast, Between Us, with me, Heather Dubrow.
And me, Terry Dubrow. Between Us isn't about perfect lighting or curated Instagram grids.
It's the unfiltered, behind closed doors conversations you wish you could eavesdrop on. Equal parts smart, funny, and a little bit scandalous.
Every week, Heather will bring you an unapologetic take on the headlines, the trends, and the cultural moments everyone's texting about.
And Terry will deliver insider beauty, health, and wellness insights you won't find on TikTok.
Together, we'll tell the stories, spill the secrets, and share the hacks that keep life, marriage, and everything in between feeling fresh and fun.
We may live in a gated community, but there's zero gatekeeping here.
And plenty of, did they just say that moments?
Listen to Between Us on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Segregation in the day, integration at night.
When segregation was the law, one mysterious black club owner had his own rules.
We didn't worry about what went on outside. It was like stepping in another world.
Inside Charlie's place, black and white people danced together. But not everyone was happy about it.
You saw the KKK?
Yeah, they was dressed up in their uniform.
The KKK set out to raid Charlie, take him away from here.
Charlie was an example of power. They had to crush him.
From Atlas Obscura, Rococo Punch, and Visit Myrtle Beach comes Charlie's Place, a story that was nearly lost to time. Until now. Listen to Charlie's Place on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You know Roald Dahl, the writer who thought up Willy Wonka, Matilda, and the BFG. But did you know he was also a spy?
Was this before he wrote his stories? It must have been.
Our new podcast series, The Secret World of Roald Dahl, is a wild journey through the hidden chapters of his extraordinary, controversial life.
His job was literally to seduce the wives of powerful Americans.
What?
And he was really good at it.
You probably won't believe it either.
Okay, I don't think that's true.
I'm telling you, the guy was a spy.
Did you know Dahl got cozy with the Roosevelts, played poker with Harry Truman, and had a long affair with a congresswoman? And then he took his talents to Hollywood, where he worked alongside Walt Disney and Alfred Hitchcock before writing a hit James Bond film. How did this secret agent wind up as the most successful children's author ever? And what darkness from his covert past seeped into the stories we read as kids? The true story is stranger than anything he ever wrote. Listen to The Secret World of Roald Dahl on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Anna Navarro, and on my new podcast, Bleep with Anna Navarro, I'm talking to the people closest to the biggest issues happening in your community and around the world. Because I know deep down inside right now, we are all cursing and asking, what the bleep is going on? I'm talking to people like Julie K. Brown, who broke the explosive story on Jeffrey Epstein in 2018. These victims have been let down time and time again for decades and decades and decades by local law enforcement, by federal law enforcement, by administration after administration.
The Justice Department, through, I think we counted 4 presidential administrations, failed these victims.
Listen to Bleep with Anna Navarro as part of the My Cultura podcast network, available on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We're back! Oh my gosh. I, for one, love that Trump for America bought up all of our advertising space. When I think of president, I think of the president. Anyway, so immigration from Mexico had not traditionally been a big political debate issue, right? The wealthy agribusiness owners in Texas preferred simple immigration from Mexico, and they fought to ensure that Mexicans were not subject to the same harsh immigration restrictions as other immigrants in the 1924 bill. One business owner put it simply, without the Mexicans, we would be done. Which hasn't really changed, you know? And it's like, we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but it is this kind of one of the things that I didn't even realize was like really problematic when I was a young person, kind of dealing with the mix between outwardly hateful racists in the Southwest and nice people who don't realize they're racist. Is like the nice people, the outwardly hateful people are like, the Trump type folks that who want to build a wall and kick all the rapist Mexicans out.
Sure, they're easy to spot. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you have this chunk of people who are like, well, I hate what Trump's doing, and like I'm happy to have Mexicans here because they do great work, and they're great at this, and they're good at that, and they're good at, and it's this thing where like, especially like you don't necessarily notice, especially as like a young white person who's like 18, 19, like what's actually being said there, which is like the commodification of non-white bodies, which is like not cool. But we're going to talk more about that later because this is where that all starts in an organized way, which is awesome. So the white working class in Texas, so obviously like these kind of landowners, the kind of aristocracy in Texas in this period, right? Like the ranchers and stuff, they were broadly like they wanted more Mexicans in. They could never get enough because like they needed people to actually work their farms. But the white working class in Texas, and the white working class even in rural areas, really had nursed like a growing hatred of Mexican people and had been for years. And this was based on a mix of like fear that Mexican immigrants would take their jobs. That was always like a core part of it. And also based on kind of like good old fashioned racism. One labor union official in Texas at the time noted, quote, "I hope they never let another Mexican come to the United States. The country would be a whole lot better off for the white laboring man if there weren't so many N-words and Mexicans."
Oh, my God.
Yeah. Well, and this is one of those things, if you're like kind of squaring yourself with the history of labor, I'm a big fan of labor history, and I think there's a lot of wonderful stuff there. You do have to square with the fact that like a lot of those dudes who were right about a lot of important things were incredibly racist and hated non-white people because they saw them as a threat to white working class people.
I mean, which that all stems from capitalism, more or less.
Yes, absolutely.
Where if there was any fairness or parity when it came to income and labor, people wouldn't have to be worried about other people. There wouldn't be this fear of like, who is my job in danger? Who's going to take my job? Because they're like a more just socialized economy would eliminate that fear.
Absolutely.
Yep. So the actual laws on the books in this period of time had been written largely by the rich landed gentry who needed Mexican immigrants. But now that the Border Patrol existed post-1924, the men enforcing those laws were working class whites who really just hated Mexicans, and they honestly didn't give a shit about the needs of farmers. And in fact, a lot of them saw kind of being able to police undocumented migrants as a way of kind of equalizing their level of social power with farmers, because like they were poorer than these guys, they didn't have property, but now they had the ability to arrest these dudes' workers, and like that gave them a level of power in their culture and a level of power of these people who had kind of previously been the bosses. And kind of for a lot of these guys who became the first Border Patrol workers, these were white men, but they were men whose kind of sense of whiteness had been hanging on by a thread prior to this opportunity coming around. And I'm going to quote again from the book Migra. Quote, "Early officers may have lived in white neighborhoods, worshipped at white churches, and sent their children to white schools, but as salesmen, chauffeurs, machinists, and cowpunchers, they had labored at the edges of whiteness in the borderlands. The steady pay and everyday social authority of U.S. immigration law enforcement work dangled before them the possibility of lifting themselves from a marginalized existence as what Neil Foley has examined as the white scourge of borderland communities. Policing Mexicans, in other words, presented officers with the opportunity to enter the region's primary economy and, in the process, shore up their tentative claims upon whiteness. As immigration control was emerging as a critical site of simultaneously expanding the boundaries of whiteness while hardening the distinctions between whites and non-whites, the project of enforcing immigration restrictions therefore placed Border Patrol officers at what police scholar David Bailey describes as the cutting edge of the state's knife in terms of enforcing new boundaries between whites and non-whites." So that is the Border Patrol in this period, the cutting edge of the state's knife. Cleaving the boundaries between white and non-white people. The way to look at it. Very picturesque.
Yeah. Oof.
Now, this is made a lot more complicated by the fact that a chunk of the early Border Patrol were Mexican-American. And these guys, in a lot of cases, saw their career in law enforcement as a way of separating themselves from non-white people. The League of United Latin American Citizens, or LULAC, specifically stated that Mexican-American association with colored races is what held them back from full acceptance by white society in this period of time. And the book Migra includes the story of one early officer, Patrol Inspector Pete Torres, who was marked by a colleague for being Mexican. In response, he shot at the man's feet and yelled, "I am not a Mexican, I am a Spanish American." Yeah, so this is like...
we're seeing some internalized racism.
It's a complicated history here. And I'm not going to... I'm not going to go into tremendous depth about this aspect of the history because I'm not at all the right person to do so. The right person to do so, in fact, is probably Kelly Little Hernandez, author of the book Migra, A History of the U.S. Border Patrol. She does talk about this in more depth, and I really recommend her book. But you should know that's like an aspect of what's going on here. And as a rule, one of the things that starts to happen, in particular around like the 40s, is kind of a growing Spanish or Mexican-American community who are very pro-immigration enforcement and pro like harsher immigration laws and laws against illegal immigration. They start to like solidify as a voting bloc in the Southwest in this period too. And they still are to this day. It's a lot of people are like shocked when they see Hispanics for Trump and stuff, and there's actually pretty deep roots for a lot of that stuff. Yeah. So most early Border Patrolmen, though, were white dudes, and it would probably be fair to call them white supremacists. And as the years went by, our government gave them increasing powers to exercise racism with state authority behind it. From a write-up in The Intercept, quote, "While the 1924 immigration law spared Mexico a quota, a series of secondary laws, including one that made it a crime to enter the country outside of official ports of entry, gave border and customs agents on-the-spot discretion to decide who could enter the country legally. They had the power to turn what had been a routine daily or seasonal event, crossing the border to go to work, into a ritual of abuse. Hygienic inspections became more widespread and even more degrading. Migrants had their heads shaved, and they were subjected to an increasingly arbitrary set of requirements at the discretion of patrollers, including literacy tests and entrance fees. The patrol wasn't a large agency at first, just a few hundred men during its early years, and its reach along a 2,000-mile line was limited. But over the years, its reported brutality grew as the number of agents it deployed increased. Border agents beat, shot, and hung migrants with regularity. 2 patrollers, former Texas Rangers, tied the feet of one migrant and dragged him in and out of a river until he confessed to having entered the country illegally. Other patrollers were members of the resurgent Ku Klux Klan, active in border towns from Texas to California. Practically every other member of El Paso's National Guard was in the Klan, one military officer recalled, and many had joined the Border Patrol upon its establishment. So, not great, ideally, you know, if you ask me. We keep coming back to the KKK and how it repeatedly infiltrated law enforcement. Someone maybe ought to do something about that. So, for its first 10 years of existence, the Border Patrol operated under the authority of the Department of Labor. And when FDR was elected, he appointed Frances Perkins to be Secretary of Labor, and she tried to curtail the violence of the Border Patrol and reform it. And this didn't really work out in the long run. She attempted to cut down on warrantless arrests. She mandated that detained migrants had a right to receive phone calls. She fought to provide migrants with at least some version of the civil rights they lacked as non-citizens. But before long, FDR was pressured by the agricultural industry to put the Border Patrol under the control of the Department of Justice. Now, this might seem surprising at first because, like, these rich farmers were the same folks who'd fought to ensure Mexican immigrants wouldn't be subject to quotas in the 1924 immigration law.
Right.
But there's a reason behind it, because these folks had wanted, these ranchers and stuff had wanted Mexicans here to work their farms, but they hadn't wanted these people to actually stay in the United States. Lobbyist S. Parker Frizzell had told Congress in 1926, "The Mexican is a homer, like the pigeon he goes home to roost." And Frizzell's promise had been that Mexicans weren't really immigrants, and thus they should be exempt from the USA's white supremacist immigration laws. They were birds of passage, he argued, just hanging around for a little while to work. But by the turn of the decade, as we start going into the 1930s, Mexicans had started to settle all across the Southwest, buying homes and starting communities in places like Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. In 1900, only about 100,000 Mexican immigrants had lived in the United States. By 1930, there were 1.5 million Mexican immigrants in this country. So this starts to freak out a lot of white agriculturalists, right? And it kind of... they had been okay with these people coming in to work, but at the end of the day, they were the same kind of white supremacists as the border patrolmen. They were just a little bit more refined. And once it started to look like these Mexicans were coming in and actually going to be contributing and changing the demographics of the nation, they panicked. And the only thing they could really think of to do was give the border patrol more power to enforce how many Mexicans could enter the country. And there was a real big debate over this, right? Because you still needed as these farmers, you still needed a certain minimum amount of migrants coming in every year in order to actually keep your farms working. And the guy who kind of figured out a solution to this problem was Senator Coleman Livingston Blease. He was a white supremacist congressman who first took office in 1925. And his solution was, rather than creating a system of quotas and caps that would have reduced manpower in American fields, he just wanted to criminalize unmonitored border crossing. So this is the very first time that it becomes illegal to cross the U.S.-Mexican border without doing it at a border station. That's 1929 that law is passed. Okay. And I'm going to quote from an article in The Conversation explaining what happened here. According to Blease's bill, unlawfully entering the country would be a misdemeanor, while unlawfully returning to the United States after deportation would be a felony. The idea was to force Mexican immigrants into an authorized and monitored stream that could be turned on and off at will at ports of entry. Any immigrant who entered the United States outside of bounds of the stream would be a criminal subject to fines, imprisonment, and ultimately deportation. But it was a crime designed to impact Mexican immigrants in particular. Neither the Western agricultural businessmen nor the restrictionists registered any objections. Congress passed Blease's bill, the Immigration Act of March 4th, 1929, and dramatically altered the story of crime and punishment in the United States. With stunning precision, the criminalization of unauthorized entry caged thousands of Mexico's birds of passage. By the end of 1930, the U.S. Attorney General reported prosecuting 7,000 cases of unlawful entry. By the end of the decade, U.S. attorneys had prosecuted more than 44,000 cases. Now, Blease's law applied technically to Canadians as well, but basically everyone prosecuted under it was Mexican. And it was mainly used as kind of a method of mostly nonviolent ethnic cleansing. I don't even know if I'd say mostly nonviolent. It was used for ethnic cleansing. Throughout the 1930s, Mexicans made up at least 85% of all immigration prisoners. Sometimes, some years, they made up 99%. 3 new prisons were built on the border to hold them all. And over the course of the decade, somewhere around 1 million Mexicans were deported from the United States. And most of these people were U.S. citizens. Historian Francisco Balderrama argues that 60% of the million people who were deported were U.S. citizens of Mexican descent. And Border Patrol forces would call what was happening here repatriation to make it seem voluntary. But what was really happening in the 30s was Border Patrol was just rounding up all of the Mexicans they could get and throwing them across the border, and kind of accusing people of unlawful crossing of the border, basically, as a justification for kicking them out. So that's cool.
I just the resources that get used and spent to enforce these laws and build prisons and maintain the prison and just all of that costs so much time and is so much effort. Why, it would be so much easier if we would just let immigrants come and then just let them live and be a part of the community. What? I mean, I know why.
Because racism. Yeah.
It's absurd.
Yeah, the Border Patrol's pretty lame, Caitlin. This is this is what it is from the beginning. One of the first things the Border Patrol ever does is deport 1 million people, more than half of whom are U.S. citizens. And it just lies about what it's doing, because from the beginning, its job has never been to actually enforce the rule of law or even protect the border. Its job is to protect whiteness.
Right.
Yep. So the primary method of action for Border Patrol agents from the beginning up to now was violence. The force was always undermanned and underfunded, with a handful of officers responsible for thousands of miles of rugged terrain. There was little to no oversight, and agents generally used violence at their discretion, as this anecdote from the book Migra illustrates. Quote, "One day in 1928," explains Stovall, who was a Border Patrol agent, "he was patrolling alone near San Elizario, Texas, when he decided to drive through town. San Elizario was this little Mexican town on the Rio Grande," said Stovall, who remembered that when he got to town that day, he saw a Mexicano come out from behind the bank of a drainage ditch and then duck back. Stovall admitted to knowing the man, but stopped the car and asked him, "What do you have there in your bosom?" The man reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out 2 bottles of beer and put them down on the bridge and broke them so he wouldn't have any evidence. Reflecting upon the incident, Stovall wondered, "Why didn't I pull out my gun and fire at that Mexican? I don't know. I don't know why. Instead of reaching for his gun and firing, Stovall fled. I got in my car and got away from there," remembered Stovall, "because it was in daylight about 1 o'clock. If I had pulled my gun and fired, there would have been 50 Mexicans around me that quick." According to Stovall, God spared his life that day by taking charge of his hands and preventing him from shooting at the Mexicano. So this is 1928 and kind of a common attitude. Like, this Border Patrol agent approaches a guy who's got illegal alcohol, and the dude breaks the bottles on him. And the man's lingering question that he's wondering for years afterwards is, why didn't I shoot that man to death? Like, yeah, cool
what
stuff.
Some people think justifies killing another person is something I will never comprehend.
Yeah, I don't think they thought they were people.
Yeah. True.
Yeah, and it's probably worth noting how common brutality was, like open brutality was among U.S. law enforcement officials, even at like pretty high levels in politics at this time. In May of 1954, Herbert Brownell, the Attorney General, Eisenhower's Attorney General, gave a speech where he asked U.S. labor leaders for their support in the event that Border Patrol agents, quote, "shot wetbacks in cold blood." So again, not saying like, hey, we might have an accidental shooting and I need your support because like what we're doing is hard and, you know, people are going to mess up. He's like, you know, my guys might murder some Mexicans. You know, my guys are absolutely going to commit murder in cold blood and I need you to like have my back.
Right.
That's the Attorney General of the United States.
Wow.
1954. Cool stuff.
You know what else is cool stuff?
I don't, Sophie. I can't imagine what you're going for here. What is cool stuff?
That's fine. That's fine. I'll just leave.
You know who isn't the Attorney General of the United States?
Hopefully.
The products and services that support this podcast. So, racism's not good. You know who else isn't good? The head of the Border Patrol in the 1950s.
Another good pivot. Nice.
Yeah, a great pivot. So the guy in charge of the Border Patrol as we turn into the 1950s is an outright monster by the name of Harlan Carter. Now, Carter was, by the time he became the head of the Border Patrol, a convicted murderer. Yeah, in 1931, as a teenager, he'd shot a Mexican boy in the chest at point-blank range with a 12-gauge shotgun. And the two had been having an argument, and the Mexican boy had a knife, but he was not actively threatening Carter. And in fact, he'd laughed at the boy's gun because he just kind of seemed to think it was silly that they were having a fight at all, and Carter shot him to death because he was angry for being laughed at. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to 3 years in prison, but he was let out after 2 owing to a technicality. So, back in 1931, by the way, you could shoot a man in the chest with a 12-gauge and get 3 years. So that's neat. I love laws. Yes. Yeah.
Our justice system is cool.
Yeah, he got rehabilitated. He went on to become the head of the Border Patrol and also was the head of the NRA.
Uh-oh.
Harlan Carter's an interesting piece of shit. So throughout the 40s, apprehensions by the Border Patrol were kind of ad hoc and disorganized, and they were mostly the result of individual agents seeking out undocumented immigrants by catching them in transit. This meant that large numbers of people were almost never apprehended at a time. It was more just like agents kind of going out and hunting people down and grabbing a couple of folks. This was an easy system for dumb, violent men to like figure out. You know, you just kind of, it's like hunting basically. And it appealed to the kind of folks who became Border Patrol agents. But starting in 1950, a young agent named Albert Quillen began to change things. He was intelligent and ambitious, and when the chief supervisor of Border Patrol demanded that he and his colleagues increase apprehensions, Quillen began experimenting with bold new strategies. At 5 a.m. on February 11th, Quillen took a detail of 12 patrolmen with 2 buses, 1 plane, 1 truck, and 9 automobiles. The men drove out to a small station in Rio Hondo, Texas, and then split into 2 groups to clean as well as possible a certain section of illegal aliens. The plane acted as a spotter, while the buses were used to, quote, haul wets to the border. 100 people were apprehended in short order, and they were deported the next day. Quillen soon moved on with his force to a series of farms near Los Fresnos, Texas. They found 561 wets, which is, again, always the term they use for it. Do you understand where that term comes from?
I don't know that I actually know the source of it, no.
Yeah, so basically, the idea is that there were kind of two options for Mexicans at this time. There was the Bracero program, which was a program by which they could kind of enter the country quasi-legally and get like legal working rights to be like a laborer or something like that. And then there was, you could just cross the border, right, illegally. And that usually meant crossing the Rio Grande, which is a river, right? So you wind up wet on the other side of the river, so they call them wetbacks. Like that's still to this day a racist slang term for particularly Mexicans, but kind of all people of Hispanic descent in a lot of Texas. Like you hear it a lot from racists there. And the Border Patrol, it is their standard term for these people. This is like on all of their professional documents and everything. This is what they call migrants. Yeah. Quillen's forces catch 561 wets on their second day, and on their third day, they catch 264. On the fourth day, they catch 134. In less than a week, they captured and deported more than 1,000 undocumented laborers. And this was like unprecedented. The Border Patrol had never caught this many people this quickly. It was seen as an astonishing achievement by Quillen's superiors, and they began setting up other raids in imitation of his. Border Patrol supervisors noted that these new task forces, as they started being called, were, quote, pounding away on these wets. Cool dudes. Soon, multiple task forces had been established throughout California and Texas, carrying out constant raids and netting huge numbers of undocumented persons. On some single days, more than 5,000 Mexican nationals would be apprehended and shipped to temporary detention camps before being sent back across the border. Patrolmen handed deportees notes that read, quote, you have entered the United States illegally and in violation of the laws of your land and those of the United States. For this reason, you are being returned to your homeland. If you return again illegally, you will be arrested and punished as provided by law. We understand that the life of a wetback is difficult. Wetbacks are unable to work for more than a few hours before they are apprehended and deported. Remember these words and transmit the news to your families and countrymen if you want to do them a favor. So, that's fun.
Yikes.
Nice letter there.
Terrifying.
The language. Also, you had said alien, that was something that had been and still gets, like that language is still used. And it's just the most dehumanizing word. To refer to simply someone who travels to another place and wants to stay there.
It's pretty crazy because we don't use that word for I don't know, us. I'm excited for when we have finally the big civil war that we're all planning to have, and suddenly a shitload of
I'm not excited for the next civil war we have, but continue.
I'm excited for the people who treated Syrian refugees and treat Guatemalan and Honduran and Mexican refugees like shit, and I'm excited for them all to, I don't know, get gunned down by Canadian border guards, as we deserve as a nation. I don't know. I'm angry all the time, Caitlin. I'm sorry. That's not right.
Likewise. So am I.
Yeah. Anyway, it'll be up to Canada to be racist then, and then eventually Alaska, and then the biosphere will die. So, you know, what won't die, Caitlin? Raytheon.
Are you doing an unnecessary transition? Just do your podcast. Do your podcast.
I know. I went off on a really sad rant, and so I decided to throw in a Raytheon ad because everybody likes thinking about Raytheon. So back to the Border Patrol. So the Border Patrol would like pick up all these folks, huge numbers, thousands in a day sometimes, and they would put them in these like temporary camps, and then would take them into Mexico, where the Mexican military would basically dump them in the middle of the country, as far away from the border as possible. And these were generally places where there was no work and where these migrants had no family connections, and it was just a horrible situation for most people. As a result of these new tactics between 1950 and 1953, the number of Border Patrol apprehensions nearly doubled, from 469,000 to almost 840,000. This caused immediate problems for ranchers and farmers, who started to realize that the new legal powers they'd given the Border Patrol had vastly realigned the organization's power in a way that allowed the white supremacists who ran it to harm agribusiness by wiping out their workforce. At stake was also a sort of cultural readjustment. Farmers and ranchers were used to occupying a position at the top of society, but now Border Patrol men could exercise the power of deportation again and take away their workers. In Texas border towns like Marfa, farmers hired armed guards, hired lookouts, and booby-trapped farm gates in order to protect their workforce. There were gunfights with Border Patrol, with these like white farmers trying to defend their workforce. And as the conflict between the farmers and Border Patrol grew uglier, white border town farmers suddenly found themselves facing off against the same men who'd hunted their workers. The book Migra tells the story of D.C. Newton, whose family were Border Patrol farmers who posted guards to warn about raids. They went asleep one night in 1952 and woke up to find that dozens of Border Patrol agents had snuck in with their headlights off and to surprise everyone sleeping in the farmhouse and adjacent quarters. The Newtons' oldest son was faster, though, and he succeeded in warning the undocumented migrants staying on the farm, which gave them the time they needed to run like hell and hide in the trees. When the Border Patrol men came up empty in their search, they went after the white folks who actually owned the farm. And I'm going to quote from the book Migra now. They entered Newton's parents' bedroom and began shining the flashlights in my mother's eyes and my father's eyes, telling them to get up. We're going to go out and find where your Mexicans are. With my father in his pajamas, his mother in a nightgown, and no one wearing any shoes, the officers forced the family out of the house while physically pushing my mother in the back, pushing my father in the back, and demanding to know where the wetbacks were. Most of the workers had fled, including Newton's nanny, Lupe, for whom the officers claimed to be searching in particular. She had heard the arrival of the patrolmen and climbed out of the window on the second floor of the farmhouse, rolled down onto the roof of the garage, and run off to the southeast and was gone. Although the Newtons believed they had outsmarted the Border Patrol by alerting the migrants to the raid, the head Border Patrol inspector still led 53 apprehended workers away, saying, "See how you handle your groves now." Now, that's like a bad story and everything, but what's interesting here is, I guess, how horrible Newton's family is here too, because the interview with him goes on and he makes it clear that when his dad explained to him what was happening with the Border Patrol, his dad compared the conflict to the Civil War. And the side that he identified with was not the good side. Quote, Newton's father believed that by taking away their workers, the damn Yankee Border Patrol were splitting up a household. As he explained it to his son, the South Texans protected their homes, their families, their property, and their way of life from the Border Patrol raids. He was the master. The Mexican illegals were equivalent to the black slaves, and together they formed a household, a system of labor relations, in a world of tightly bound intimacy and inequity. The Border Patrol threatened their household by reducing the farmers' control over Mexico's unsanctioned migrant workers. So as the Southerners had rebelled against intrusions upon their labor relations and plantation lives, the Newton family had to defend itself against the U.S. Border Patrol. Newton's brother took the lesson to heart. When the Border Patrol raided on another night, he stood in the family driveway with a shotgun aimed at the officers. Startled by the hostile 12-year-old boy, the officers left the property and returned on another day. So yeah, what's happening here is really complicated. Yeah.
Right. There's an important thing to remember here, which is that even of the white ranch farm owners who are maybe not in favor of their workforce being sent back to their country of origin, they are still exploiting these workers, these migrant workers, and, probably not paying them well, probably not offering them, good benefits.
No, and probably keeping them in very primitive living situations, often little more than a shack, often like kind of nightmarish situation. These guys these migrants often did live very similarly to slaves, right? It wasn't quite that bad, but it was bad.
Yes.
And these farmers are like the Border Patrol agents want these migrants out because they're racist as fuck. And these farmers are also racist as fuck. They just want the migrants to stay because
they can exploit
the basis of their power. Exactly.
Right.
So again, no one to root for here other than like these migrants, but they seem to mostly get just fucked over by everybody, and that's not fun. Yep. So, yeah, it's important to remember that kind of the struggle between Border Patrol and these border farmers in Texas was a struggle between two different groups of white supremacists. And one group of white supremacists was broadly in the right because I guess it's worse to round up thousands of people in cattle cars and buses and throw them back across a border for no good reason.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no one you should be rooting for here. But what's really interesting, I find fascinating about this whole conflict, is that these racist plantation-owning white border farmers wound up like fighting the Border Patrol by kind of co-opting the language of social justice. Starting in the 1950s, ranchers began to argue that Mexican nationals were being unfairly targeted for deportations. They complained that the buses, planes, and trains used to take migrants away were cruel, inhuman, and outrageous practices trading in human misery. They began to argue that hiring Mexicans was an act of kindness by American ranchers. Mexican laborers deserved the chance to win a better life by working low-paid jobs as domestic servants and laborers. The Border Patrol was, in fact, actually fostering communism by sending these men and women back to the interior of Mexico, where they would no doubt live on in miserable poverty and join some leftist guerrilla movement. So...
yeah, because their lives being exploited farmhands in the U.S. is so much better. What? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's pretty cool how naturally that came to these farmers.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. So the Border Patrol obviously didn't listen to the protests against them. They continued to, in their own words, pound away in the borderlands, raising apprehensions. The increased workload necessitated more men in facilities, and in 1953, the Border Patrol attempted to hire 240 additional officers and made plans to build 2 new detention centers at the lower Rio Grande Valley. This enraged local farmers, and one, quote, threatened to arm his wetback laborers against the Border Patrol, threatening that there is liable to be a couple of dead border patrolmen. Death threats against patrolmen became a daily occurrence, and farmers in the lower Rio Grande lobbied their congressmen to deny the appropriation request necessary to fund the new men in facilities. These farmers insisted they weren't lobbying for their own benefit, but were doing it for migrants who were victims of the patrol's cheap vindictiveness, a great hunger to rule or ruin, to control, to govern, anything to carry a point, reckless of the consequences to the poor workmen which they herd around as cattle. And they weren't wrong in this. The facility the Border Patrol wanted to build was essentially a concentration camp. Eventually, Congress listened, and the appropriation request was denied. So, like, the protest of all these guys in Texas worked. The Border Patrol had to send its 240 men back home and cancel construction. According to the book Migra, quote, 1 month after losing the supplemental appropriation, Chief Kelly announced the Border Patrol's withdrawal from the Rio Grande Valley to a new defense line 10 miles to the north of Kingsville, Falfurrias, and Hebronville. Rather than fight a losing battle in the lower Rio Grande Valley, the Border Patrol decided to pull out of the area because, with limited forces, we can best control the wetback invasion at the line farther north. It's one of those things, I guess, I always kind of debate when you've got, like, something that is essentially a slur or is a slur in an episode of, like, this, how often to say it. And it's one of those things where I kind of feel like cleaning up the Border Patrol's official statements in the matter would be, I don't know, making it seem like they were less of a naked force for white supremacy than they were.
Sure.
Like if you replace that with Mexican nationals, that's not really what they're saying.
Right.
I don't know.
That's I mean, that puts you in a pretty a tricky position. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, they use it a lot.
Exactly.
The Border Patrol are cool guys, and we're about to hear it used again in another big way. So the men of the Border Patrol did see the immigration of Mexicans into the U.S. as an invasion, and they sought to repel it with military force, as kind of that language above, right? Referring to it as a defensive line and stuff. Like, they're defending whiteness again, and they see the encroachment of these these undocumented migrants as like an assault on white blood more than anything else. In 1953, with the rebellion of the Texas Ranchers in full swing, Harlan Carter, who's again the murderer who became the head of the Border Patrol, sat down with 2 U.S. generals to ask for their help. He wanted the military and the National Guard to assist the Border Patrol in a nationwide purge of undocumented Mexican nationals called Operation Cloudburst. The first step for this would be an anti-infiltration campaign to seal the border with the help of 2,180 troops. Border Patrol would station soldiers at strategic locations and build several long fences to block areas of heavy traffic. This part of the operation is fairly standard, aside from the presence of U.S. troops. Part 2, though, would be a containment operation, which would involve roadblocks on every major highway from the southwest to the interior of North America. These checkpoints would be used to search vehicles for illegal migrants around the clock. Part 3 was the mopping up phase, and this would involve a massive series of raids in northern locations, places far from the border like San Francisco, where groups of migrants were believed to have gathered. Businesses and camps would be raided, and the arrested migrants would be airlifted or sent by train to the interior of Mexico. Now, again, using the military, this was essentially, he wanted to bring in the army to carry out a military action to purge the United States of Hispanic people. That's what the head of Border Patrol is trying to do here. And all of the military guys he talked to are like, this sounds like a great idea. We'd love to help. But it's illegal, right? Posse comitatus means you can't use the army for shit like this. The only way around it is a presidential proclamation. And Dwight Eisenhower was actually initially all on board with issuing that proclamation. But in the end, he kind of backed away. And instead, he appointed a general, Joseph Swing, to be the new commissioner of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and was basically like, we can't use soldiers for this because it's unconstitutional, but I'm going to promote a general to be in charge of the INS, and you figure out a way to do the same thing with the resources Border Patrol has. Like, use your, I still want a military operation to clear out these Hispanic people. I just can't use soldiers. So that's cool.
Oh, good grief.
Yeah.
The mental gymnastics that
what?
that these people do to justify their horrible actions. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's pretty great. I don't know. So 1 month after joining INS, General Swing announces that he's going to be leading the Border Patrol in a new paramilitary campaign based on the tactics pioneered by Albert Quillen. The new operation is given the name Operation Wetback. Again, that's the Border Patrol's official name for it. That's what all these guys call it. That's what it's written up in the documents and stuff.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah, they just didn't have a fuck to give on this matter. So, true to form, Border Patrol was only given 4 weeks to prepare for what would become the largest operation in their history. The plan was to engage in an unprecedented sweep, deporting hundreds of thousands of people. No one received any training or specialized equipment to actually do this, though. All that most agents had on June 9th, 1954, when the operation began, was a letter from General Swing ordering them to purge the nation by removing the huge number of Mexican nationals who were in this country in violation of the immigration laws. Always good to hear about a purge.
Yikes.
Yeah. So in its first day, in the first day of this operation, California and Arizona agents apprehended nearly 11,000 migrants. The flood of people only accelerated after that, and the sheer number of deportees overwhelmed the Border Patrol's capacity to hold or carry them. People were left in primitive, exposed concentration camps for days. The Border Patrol turned Elysian Park in Los Angeles into an open-air concentration camp. Yeah, that's neat. Go to Elysian Park.
I've been there before, and I'll never go again.
A lot of the men who were interned there, men and women, got sick and sometimes died of sunstroke because there was no care given to their health, and it can get very hot down there. 25% of all deportees were transported by boats, many of which were so cramped and filthy that their occupants later compared them to slave ships or penal hell ships. So that's great. The Mexican government's capacity to take and transport all these people broke down almost immediately, and they were like, we need you to not send these people to us so quickly because we can't handle them. And the U.S. government said, we don't give a fuck, and kept just shotgunning people on over there. And the sheer scale of deportations began to fuck with American industry, but Border Patrol didn't really give a shit about this either. I'm going to quote again from the book Migra. Between June 17th and July 26th, 1954, 2,827 of the 4,403 migrants apprehended by the task force assigned to the Los Angeles area had worked in industry. After Border Patrol raids during the summer of 1954, 3 Los Angeles brickyards were left without sufficient numbers of workers and temporarily closed down their operations. Similarly, Border Patrol officers paid close attention to the hotel and restaurant business, which routinely hired undocumented Mexican immigrants as busboys, kitchen help, waiters, etc. Officers reported apprehending such workers at well-known establishments such as the Biltmore Hotel, Beverly Hills Hotel, Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, Los Angeles Athletic Club, and the Brown Derby. At times, the Border Patrol raids created moments of chaos at popular restaurants when migrants attempted to escape by running through the serving area. The raids were public and regularly drew significant attention from the press, and this was part of the point. The reason the Border Patrol focused so much on Los Angeles, unlike raids in big Hollywood locations, is because they were trying to make a point to these ranchers who were still fighting them in South Texas, and the message was, if we're willing to do this shit in fucking Hollywood, you'd better believe that one day we're going to come to your ranch and fuck you up, right? Like, if we'll do this to the Biltmore, we'll ruin you. Like, we don't give a shit. We're the Border Patrol. And in the end, Operation Wetback was responsible for the deportations of somewhere between 250,000 at the low end and about 1.5 million people at the high end. And, at the end of the day, it kind of ended in retreat by the Border Patrol. Part of this was that around the same time, the U.S. government reformed the Bracero program, which allowed Mexican nationals to get legal working status in the U.S., and that became much more popular after this time. So a lot of these ranchers and farmers started making sure that their workers kind of went through a legal path to gain working status in the United States. And some of it was just that, like, there was blowback to this program. It wasn't very popular, all of the massive public raids. And kind of as a result, Border Patrol apprehensions plummeted the next year in 1955. The task forces that had once captured thousands of migrants in a day were disbanded and demobilized. And for a little while, it seemed as if the Border Patrol had gone into hibernation. Of course, that, Caitlin, was not the case. And in part 2, we're going to talk about the fact that we haven't even talked about any of the worst shit that the Border Patrol gets up to in this episode, because that's how much worse it gets.
Oh, yay. Can't wait to hear about it.
So, how are you feeling?
I feel pretty terrible.
That's good. I love it when people feel terrible.
I'm always like, I can't wait to be a guest on Behind the Bastards. And then every time I do it, I'm like, oh, yes, I'm reminded by how horrible people have been to each other.
Yes, and you were the one who picked this topic with a text message, LOL, I think the Border Patrol sounds fun.
She did
there
not.
There you are, Caitlin.
She did not.
No.
That did never happen.
No.
But yeah, I mean, it's good to be informed about these things. So I appreciate learning and being further informed about it. So thank you for that.
Yep. You're welcome, Caitlin. Thank you for coming on.
Is there places people might be able to find you, listen to you, ways to support your work?
Why, there certainly are places to do that, starting with you can follow me personally on Twitter and Instagram at Caitlin Durante. You can also check out my podcast right here on this network. It's called The Bechtel Cast. I co-host it with Jamie Loftus, and we talk about the representation of women in film and just film in general, examining it through an intersectional feminist lens. So that is what we do, and you can check that out wherever you find podcasts. Are you doing any
screenwriting classes right now?
Oh, yes, I am. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I also teach screenwriting on account of a master's degree in screenwriting that I absolutely hate to mention or ever just bring up, but it does allow me to teach online classes. So if that's of any interest to anyone, go to my website, CaitlinDurante.com/classes, and I usually have new sections coming up starting soon at any given point. So,
and if you want to learn from me, I don't teach screenwriting, but I do teach screamwriting, which is where you sit down with a pencil and paper and I scream at you, and then eventually you give me money to go away.
That sounds very educational.
Sounds like
Yep,
what
yep,
I do.
we all have
Sounds
to have
like
an
my
extra couple of
full-time
grifts.
job.
So either pay Caitlin for an actual service or pay me to abuse you. Either way.
Don't love that as a line. But
you know what, Sophie? Look, everybody, you gotta be mean to the audience, Sophie. You gotta
love
really
our
kick their
fans.
ass.
I don't know about
Hey.
you. I love them. I appreciate them.
Wait,
and I
Robert.
appreciate you, Robert. So kindness.
Is there any way in which you think that like closing out a podcast is similar to making love, just to bring things full circle?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Good question.
You know, here's how closing a podcast is like making love. Both of them are inherently disappointing, and that's
You
the end
can
of the
follow
episode.
Robert and I Write Okay on Twitter. You can follow us at BastardSpot on Twitter and Instagram. We have a TeePublic store. That's it. Bye.
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 Almost 30 years together, 4 kids, and some of reality TV's most unforgettable moments, we know a thing or two about living life out loud. We're taking you behind the scenes in our new podcast, Between Us, with me, Heather Dubrow.
And me, Terry Dubrow. Between Us isn't about perfect lighting or curated Instagram grids.
It's the unfiltered, behind closed doors conversations you wish you could eavesdrop on. Equal parts smart, funny, and a little bit scandalous.
Every week, Heather will bring you an unapologetic take on the headlines, the trends, and the cultural moments everyone's texting about.
And Terry will deliver insider beauty, health, and wellness insights you won't find on TikTok.
Together, we'll tell the stories, spill the secrets, and share the hacks that keep life, marriage, and everything in between feeling fresh and fun.
We may live in a gated community, but there's zero gatekeeping here.
And plenty of, did they just say that moments?
Listen to Between Us on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Segregation in the day, integration at night.
When segregation was the law, one mysterious black club owner had his own rules.
We didn't worry about what went on outside. It was like stepping in another world.
Inside Charlie's place, black and white people danced together. But not everyone was happy about it.
You saw the KKK?
Yeah, they was dressed up in their uniform.
The KKK set out to raid Charlie, take him away from here.
Charlie was an example of power. They had to crush him.
From Atlas Obscura, Rococo Punch, and Visit Myrtle Beach comes Charlie's Place. A story that was nearly lost to time. Until now. Listen to Charlie's Place on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You know Roald Dahl, the writer who thought up Willy Wonka, Matilda, and the BFG. But did you know he was also a spy?
Was this before he wrote his stories? It must have been.
Our new podcast series, The Secret World of Roald Dahl, is a wild journey through the hidden chapters of his extraordinary, controversial life.
His job was literally to seduce the wives of powerful Americans.
What?
And he was really good at it.
You probably won't believe it either.
Okay, I don't think that's true.
I'm telling you, the guy was a spy.
Did you know Dahl got cozy with the Roosevelts, played poker with Harry Truman, and had a long affair with a congresswoman? And then he took his talents to Hollywood, where he worked alongside Walt Disney and Alfred Hitchcock before writing a hit James Bond film. How did this secret agent wind up as the most successful children's author ever? And what darkness from his covert past seeped into the stories we read as kids? The true story is stranger than anything he ever wrote. Listen to The Secret World of Roald Dahl on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Anna Navarro, and on my new podcast, Bleep with Anna Navarro, I'm talking to the people closest to the biggest issues happening in your community and around the world. Because I know deep down inside right now, we are all cursing and asking, what the bleep is going on? I'm talking to people like Julie K. Brown, who broke the explosive story on Jeffrey Epstein in 2018. These victims have been let down time and time again for decades and decades and decades by local law enforcement, by federal law enforcement, by administration after administration.
The Justice Department, through, I think we counted 4 presidential administrations, failed these victims.
Listen to Bleep with Ana Navarro as part of the My Cultura podcast network. Available on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, world, but specifically Australia. This is Robert Evans, host of Behind the Bastards, and I just wanted my Australian listeners in particular to know that I stood up for you against Caitlin's cruelty just a minute ago. She pronounced the name of your greatest city, Melbourne, like a savage.
Yeah,
and,
I said Melbourne, and then, okay, well, what about the people who live in Sydney or other cities in Australia?
There's one city in Australia. Its name is Melbourne, and that's the end of this digression. Hello, Caitlin Durante, guest for today's episode. How are you doing?
Well, I would be doing better if you would pronounce my last name correctly. Speaking of
Shots
mispronunciation.
Durante. Caitlin Durante.
It's Durante.
I think we've all learned a lesson about maybe not judging each other because it's impossible to ever know how words are supposed to be said.
Yeah, he thinks Ariana Grande's name is Ariana Grande, so.
You know, Sophie, you've been giving me guff about that one for a while.
As it deserves.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now I'm sad.
Don't be sad, Robert.
This is part 2
if
of
we
our
didn't
episodes.
get to pick on a white man at the beginning of an episode, then, like, what's the point?
Yeah, this is a whole episode about, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's
wait,
part 2
Sophie,
of our Border Patrol series.
Let's pass the Bechdel test right now, Sophie.
Oh, Caitlin, I'm really enjoying the bluish shirt you're wearing right now.
Oh my gosh! Well, I'm so glad you brought it up because, it's a Paddington shirt that says "Migration is not a crime," which is relevant to today's episode.
Oh wow! It really is relevant to today's episode that we're recording.
But then I said Paddington, and that messed up the Bechdel test.
I was like, "Are we gendering Paddington right now?" Because that
Paddington is a non-binary asexual icon.
Yes.
Yeah.
So kind of passed the Bechdel test. Okay, Robert, do you want to host your show Behind the Bastards right now? Because
I don't actually know if we passed the Bechdel test there, but you know what test we did pass is the writing for many hours about the Border Patrol test.
Yes.
Which is a more important test, I think. So, this one we're splitting up a little bit weirdly over the course of 2 weeks because my entire life and schedule has been continually thrown into chaos. So I do apologize for this one being done a little bit differently than others are done. On December 6th, 2018, 7-year-old Jacqueline Call crossed the U.S.-Mexico border near a place called Antelope Wells, New Mexico. She was with her father, 29-year-old Neri Call. Both were Quechua Maya, and they'd lived most of their lives in the Alta Verapaz region of Guatemala. Starving and desperate, she and her family turned themselves into the Border Patrol. When Jacqueline was taken into their custody, she was already beginning to show signs of illness, what would turn out to have been a streptococcal infection. DHS maintains that they conducted an initial screening and that there was no evidence of health issues in the little girl. Jacqueline was placed on a Border Patrol bus, feverish and vomiting from severe dehydration. 8 hours after being taken into custody, she began to suffer seizures. She died the next day. Gomez Alonso, age 8, crossed the U.S.-Mexico border sometime around December 18th. He and his father, Augustin, were members of the Chuj people, another Mayan group who came from the Huehuetenango region of Guatemala. Gomez spent 6 days in Border Patrol custody, shuttled around from New Mexico to El Paso, and then back to New Mexico to be interned in a detention facility named near Alamogordo. He started to show symptoms of sickness on the 24th. He was taken to the hospital, where he was tested for the cold, but not for influenza, which he had. He was given medicine that could not help him and sent back to jail, where he died on Christmas Eve, 2018.
Oh, no.
Yep. Good times.
That's awful.
Yeah, it's real bad. The deaths of Gomez and Jacqueline were briefly very big news in the United States. It was believed that the two were the first child immigrant deaths in Border Patrol custody since 2010. In 2019, though, it was revealed that another child, Darylyn Cordova Val of El Salvador, had actually died back in September 2018 under similar circumstances. The Trump administration received a lot of blame, both for covering this death up to try to influence the midterm elections and for their failure to push DHS to take any meaningful action to stop kids from dying at the border. 3 dead children is a tragedy, but their little corpses are actually just the top of an iceberg of dead people, many of them Guatemalan, that we can lay at the feet of Border Patrol agents. And you might be surprised to learn how that whole situation came about. You want to hear about this, Caitlin? You excited?
I guess I have to. Also, what colorful language you used in terms of the corpses are at the top of an iceberg. I mean, wow.
Yeah, I think if you're going to talk about dead kids, you should do it with a little bit of panache.
All right, I'm ready. Keep going.
All right, so let's talk about the Border Patrol and in Central America. We're going to talk about something I don't think a lot of people know about, because usually, as a rule, when we talk about how bad the Border Patrol is, we talk about like how mean they are to people who come up to the border, but we don't talk about what a lot of Border Patrol guys did in the countries that these people are fleeing from before people started fleeing from those countries. So this is going to be fun.
Okay,
This is going to be a good time for everybody. So John P. Longan was a U.S. Border Patrol agent in the 1940s and 50s. He worked near the Mexican border, close to where both Jacqueline and Gomez crossed over. Most sources you find on the matter will note that he had a reputation for violence, but this was not at all uncommon among the men of the Border Patrol, nor is it uncommon now. During Operation Wetback, when the Border Patrol reformed itself into a paramilitary force to wage war on Mexican immigrants, Longan ran the patrol's equivalent of a military intelligence service. Longan's base was an unmarked building near Alameda. He and his men interrogated captured migrants, extracted information, and used it to find and capture other groups of migrants. Few of the men who endured these interrogations ever spoke about it, but a lot of what happened in those cells probably verged on what we'd consider torture. Longan was good at his job, and his performance in Operation Wetback earned him a transfer to the State Department's Public Safety Program. Now, this was in reality a CIA operation, geared at providing counterinsurgency training and advice to allied nations combating communist insurgencies. The CIA handpicked a number of Border Patrol agents to travel to places like Venezuela, Thailand, the Dominican Republic, and Guatemala. They particularly liked recruiting guys like Longan because they were likely to speak Spanish. Now, the way the State Department framed this program was training law enforcement. So, the State Department framed this program as training law enforcement. The reality, though, is that Longan and his fellow Border Patrolmen were sent over to places like Guatemala to create and train death squads. During Operation Wetback, Border Patrol administrators had described their work as fighting back against an invasion. In Guatemala, where Longan arrived in 1965, he was finally able to wage a real war using real weapons. I'm going to quote now from an article in The Nation. Quote, Longan taught local intelligence and police agencies how to create death squads to target political activists, deploying tactics that he had earlier used to capture migrants on the border. He arrived in Guatemala in late 1965, where he put into place a paramilitary unit that, early the next year, would execute what he called Operación Limpieza, or Operation Cleanup. Within 3 months, this unit had conducted over 80 raids and multiple extrajudicial assassinations, including an action that, over the course of 4 days, captured, tortured, and executed more than 30 prominent left opposition leaders. The military dumped their bodies into the sea while the government denied any knowledge of their whereabouts. According to Stuart Schrader in his forthcoming Badges Without Borders, How Global Counterinsurgency Transformed American Policing, it was common practice during the Cold War to send former Border Patrol agents, like Longan, to train foreign police through CIA-linked public safety programs, since they were more likely to speak Spanish than agents from other branches of law enforcement. In countries like El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, they did the dirty work that Reagan's envoys said needed doing. Until the early 1970s, the United States, according to a 1974 Los Angeles Times report, was flying its Latin American death squad apprentices up to the Border Patrol Academy in Los Fresnos, Texas, to receive training from CIA instructors in the design, manufacture, and potential use of bombs and incendiary devices. Longan himself, in 1957, clearly described what he thought he was doing at the border. We're fighting a war on a wide battlefront. So that's good.
So they're just basically training kill squads. They're just training people to murder people.
Yeah, and they're pulling Border Patrol guys off the line to do some of the training, to be like, oh, you already are good at like tracking down these groups of people who are trying to like facilitate movement of migrants through the United States. You can use those skills to track down political activists, except that, you know, since it's in a foreign country, you can just have them brutally murdered by death squads. And these guys are happy to do it because they want to be murdering people anyway. They just can't quite usually murder people, at the border. I mean, they do it a lot anyway, but like they have to be a little bit careful. But you don't have to be careful at all in Guatemala. So that's great.
Oh, gee whiz.
Have you ever been to Guatemala, Caitlin?
I have not. Have you?
It rules. Yeah, I spent a lot of time there. It's a great country, beautiful place, completely dysfunctional government. And you can see like signs of the horrible civil war there all over the place. Just like you'll cross the street and there'll just be a bunch of guys who are all missing arms and legs. You'll be driving through the middle of nowhere and you'll see like businesses that have been were shot up decades ago with mortars and stuff. And it all kind of descends from the series of political conflicts that launch in this period of time, particularly in the early 1980s, that are backed by the United States and supported enthusiastically by the Reagan government. And these kind of networks of right-wing murder crews that were trained up and sent out by the CIA and their buddies in groups like the Border Patrol. This all starts now, and it's cool. It's great.
And it's refugees from these conflicts that are seeking refuge in
right up to today.
The U.S. And then they get here and they're like, well, sorry, fuck you. We're either going to murder you or be negligent and let you die in our custody or send you back to this, war-torn country you're in.
Yeah, if you listen to right-wingers, they'll usually say something like, oh, they should go back to their own country and fix its problems. And the reality is that, some of them tried to do that, and then we trained death squads to murder them and throw their bodies in rivers and stuff, in the ocean. And that's why people are less willing to try to fix problems, because they get killed, and so do their children, because of the guys that we hired and trained to kill them and their children when they attempt to fight for economic justice.
Oops.
It's good. It's really good, is what I'm getting at. So, Operation Limpieza, which, Longan, the Border Patrol guy, orchestrated himself, was a major moment in the history of Guatemala's collapse into a nightmare. The military intelligence system he helped to build would eventually eliminate tens of thousands of leftist activists, sympathizers, and random people mistaken for either. More than 200,000 people were massacred openly. Tens of thousands more were tortured. In this way, the brave men of the Border Patrol wound up at both sides of a tragedy. The genocide they trained right-wing Guatemalan militants to execute fell heavily on various Maya peoples of the region, including the Kekchi and the Chuj. The right-wing dictator who helped to organize much of this violence was General Efrain Rios Montt. He rose to power in 1981 and 1982, cooing his way into command with the help of his good friends, the U.S. Ronald Reagan described him as a man of great integrity who was totally dedicated to democracy. The nation's write-up continues, quote, on June 17th, 1982, Guatemalan soldiers under the command of Rios Montt entered the San Francisco cattle estate immediately adjacent to Yalambolok. The estate's owner, a military colonel, had fled because of guerrilla activity in the area. Soldiers went house by house, rounding up workers and their families, whom they accused of supporting the guerrillas. They separated children from their parents and killed them by slashing their stomachs or smashing their heads against poles. Women were raped and then burned alive. The soldiers killed the men with bullets or by beheading. After a day of slaughter, 350 people were dead. A lone survivor made his way into Mexico, where Guatemalan anthropologist and Jesuit priest Ricardo Falla interviewed him. The San Francisco massacre was highlighted in Guatemala's 1999 Truth Commission report. After the massacre, Yalambolok residents fled along with thousands of others, leaving the border corridor between Guatemala and Mexico completely depopulated, as government troops razed their villages. Some were captured and killed by the army as they fled. Others ended up in refugee camps or dispersed throughout Mexico's southern states. Still others continued on to the United States, beginning the great movement of Guatemalans to El Norte. All told, 1.5 million people were displaced by the Guatemalan Army's Scorched Earth campaign in 1981 and 1982. Guatemala's Commission for Historical Clarification called the violent displacement in the Maya Chuj region an act of genocide. Young Felipe Gomez Alazano's father, he was the little kid, one of the little kids who died, Agustin Gomez Perez, was a child of 11 during that execute. Yalambolok's villagers stayed away for 14 years, returning only after the signing of the peace accords in 1996. So, that's cool.
What can you say besides that's horrible?
You can say that like we're focusing on Guatemala right here because it's one where there's a bit more documentation, but like this shit happened in El Salvador. It happened in a bunch of different parts of Latin and Central America, where, you know, refugees come from all the time now. It's still in a lot of ways going on today. If you want to read about like Plan Colombia and stuff, like there's aspects of this that are very much still occurring, and that the Border Patrol still winds up getting tied up in from time to time, and that's great.
Oh, good grief! Yeah,
this is like the stuff that part of me that like is optimistic wants to believe that, oh, if people just knew this, like knew how this all how U.S. policy and U.S. Plotting played into the tragedy being suffered by these people and like the insecurity of these regions, they would have better attitudes towards, you know, Guatemalan migration and whatnot into the United States. And then the part of me that has been paying attention for the last several decades knows that like, no, actually, people would cheer the murders of the folks and the destruction of these areas because Americans have been so thoroughly broken by propaganda that the people who are still on the right and still broadly pro-American can't be convinced by any reason that any amount of murder or violence is not justified by the fact that America is cool as hell.
It is this... Oh, what a toxic mentality that we as Americans, or at least some of us, have, because like, and this is, I'm not about to say anything new or profound here, but the fact that, you know, the white European settlers were escaping the same, you know, kind of civil unrest or religious persecution or whatever it was that caused them to fled their countries. And then we settled here by killing millions of indigenous people, and now we're like, well, our borders are closed now. Sorry, everyone. And it's like, how can you live? How can these people live with the hypocrisy of that simple fact?
Because they're shit. Anyway,
they're shit.
So most of these death squads, were trained in the United States because, like, hey, if you're gonna build a death squad for a foreign country, you don't want to like train it there. That's kind of gauche. So you bring them into your country to train them there because you're good at training death squads. So the facility where they actually trained a lot of these death squads, and again, not just in Guatemala, but for places like Colombia and El Salvador, all throughout the fucking world, the place where they would like take these men to teach them how to be terrorists, how to make bombs and all this shit, was the Los Fresnos, Texas Border Patrol facility. It was an existing base. It was in a good location. And the Border Patrol was perfectly happy to have men sent over there to learn how to become murderous guerrillas and then set off terrorist bombs in the middle of their own countries, because they were like, that sounds like a thing the Border Patrol should be involved with. Now, the technical investigations course that was given to foreign police there was taught by CIA instructors. It lasted 4 weeks, and it included curriculum like terrorist concepts, terrorist devices, fabrication and functioning of devices, improvised triggering devices, incendiaries, and assassination weapons, a discussion of various weapons which may be used by the assassin. And when you read it like that, you can kind of trick yourself into thinking it might not be like it might be a reasonable thing for cops to learn, right? Of course, cops might need to learn about terrorist concepts and the kind of weapons assassins use. But these were not just informational courses, they were instructed. So the police who attended weren't just learning, oh, here's weapons that assassins sometimes use. They were learning, like, if you're going to assassinate somebody, here's a variety of different weapons that you can use to assassinate people. They were just learning, like, here's different ways terrorists build triggers for bombs. They were learning, here's how to build triggers for the bombs you're going to make to kill people. The reality of the whole program came out during congressional investigations in the 1970s. And I'm going to quote now from a book titled Instruments of Statecraft, U.S. Guerrilla Warfare, Counterinsurgency, and Counterterrorism, which is available in full for free online right now. Quote, during congressional investigations led by Senator James Alvarez in 1973, 8 officials admitted that the Los Fresnos sessions, what the press would call the bomb school, offered lessons not in bomb disposal, but in bomb making. The course is not designed to, nor does it prepare the student to be a bomb or explosive disposal technician. The thrust of the instruction introduces trainees to commercially available materials and home laboratory techniques in the manufacture of explosives and incendiaries. Different types of explosive techniques and booby traps and their construction and use by terrorists are demonstrated. And again, all these classes were taught at a Border Patrol facility. And while the main instructors were CIA agents, it was not just the convenient location that made the agency use Los Fresnos. The Border Patrol had always had within it the seeds of a national secret police force. Decades before CBP agents were operating in unmarked snatch vans on the streets of Portland, and it was Customs and Border Patrol who was doing that, they helped to train foreign police to do the exact same thing and much worse besides. So that's fun. I keep like wanting to say like, what a fun thing. Because I don't know what else to say. It's just like this kind of litany of horrors that we've all just kind of blithely funded our entire lives, even though a great deal of information exists on how bad this agency has always been. Because the only real, if you actually like get into it as we are today, the only real conclusion is that like, maybe when you have people whose job it is to police the border, they're just going to be the worst people, and maybe you shouldn't police the border at all because this happened. But
maybe
I'm sure
borders are completely arbitrary and mean nothing. And why have we decided that crossing them is a crime?
Yeah, it's bad. And the kind of people who decide that like they want to make their whole lives about punishing desperate people for the quote unquote crime of crossing a border are monsters. And when you start giving them guns and power, they use it to enable genocides and political oppression abroad, and then inevitably do so back at home, which is what's happening now. So, when it comes to government agencies that Americans, particularly liberals, rage against, Customs and Border Patrol has spent most of its history kind of sliding under the mainstream radar. But liberals who only started paying attention to the agency after Trump took office might be surprised to know that NYT reporter or New York Times reporter John Crudson won a Pulitzer Prize in 1980 for a series of articles about the Border Patrol whose titles would not look at all out of place in 2020. Titles like Border Patrol Sweeps of Illegal Aliens Leave Scores of Children in Jails. That sounds a little familiar. The Intercept, summarizing his work, notes, patrollers, he reported, regularly engaged in beatings, murder, torture, and rape, including the rape of girls as young as 12. Some patrollers ran their own in-house outlaw vigilante groups. Others maintained ties with groups like the Klan. Border Patrol agents also used the children of migrants, either as bait or as a pressure tactic to force confessions. When coming upon a family, agents tried to apprehend the youngest member first, with the idea that relatives would give themselves up so as not to be separated. It may sound cruel, one patroller said, but it often worked. Separating migrant families was not official government policy in the years Crudson was reporting on abuses, but left to their own devices, Border Patrol agents regularly took children from parents, threatening that they would be separated forever unless one of them confessed that they had entered the country illegally. Mothers especially, an agent said, would always break. Once a confession was extracted, children might be placed in foster care or left to languish in federal jails. Others were released into Mexico alone, far from their homes, forced to survive, according to public defenders, by garbage can scrounging, living on rooftops, and whatever. 10-year-old Sylvia Alvarado, separated from her grandmother as they crossed into Texas, was kept in a small cinder block cell for more than 3 months. In California, 13-year-old Julia Perez, threatened with being arrested and denied food, broke down and told her investigator that she was Mexican, even though she was a U.S. citizen. The Border Patrol released Perez into Mexico with no money or way to contact her U.S. family. Such cruelties weren't one-offs, but part of a pattern, encouraged and committed by officers up the chain of command. The violence was both gratuitous and systemic, including stress techniques later associated with the war in Iraq.
I mean, wow.
What kind of truly inhuman monster do you have to be
to join the Border Patrol?
To be, yes, and more specifically, to use children as bait or to like snatch them first as just like, I can't even form a sentence. That is...
Yeah, it's not great.
I mean, the sentence that you said, like, I got teary-eyed with the mothers.
Yeah, it's
the
bad.
mothers broke first or what?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was horrible.
No, it's I don't know. You know, when I talk about how this all actually makes me feel, there's no way to do that without repeatedly urging other people to commit federal crimes, up to and including assault and murder. So I'm just like gonna stop right there and continue talking about the Border Patrol instead, because we shouldn't do that on a podcast. One tactic the Border Patrol came to adore was the locking of migrants in freezing cold rooms called hileras, or ice boxes. This goes back at least to the 1980s, according to Crutzen. Agents would tell prisoners, "In this place, you have no rights." Since these people had committed no crime beyond crossing a line in the dirt, their detention served no real purpose beyond cruelty. Cruelty was the point. Border Patrol agents throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s were repeatedly documented torturing migrants. A popular method was handcuffing them to squad cars and then making them run alongside the video as it half-dragged them to the border. Outright murder was common as well. One patrol agent told Crutzen that agents commonly pushed illegals off cliffs so it would look like an accident. Much of the agency's behavior was indistinguishable from that of a straight-up gang. Agents with INS, Border Patrol's parent agency at the time, were caught trading Mexican women to the Los Angeles Rams in exchange for season tickets.
What?
Yeah, that's the thing that happened. Yeah.
I can't.
Brave men and women of the Border Patrol. Wearing the green.
Oh my God, it's time for an ad break so that I can go vomit. Oh.
Yeah, you know who doesn't trade women for
you can't even do
sports
it.
tickets?
Vomit. It's an
Yeah,
ad. It's an ad break.
Products
and services.
Almost 30 years together, 4 kids, and some of reality TV's most unforgettable moments. We know a thing or two about living life out loud. We're taking you behind the scenes in our new podcast, Between Us, with me, Heather Dubrow.
And me, Terry Dubrow. Between Us isn't about perfect lighting or curated Instagram grids.
It's the unfiltered, behind closed doors conversations you wish you could eavesdrop on. Equal parts smart, funny, and a little bit scandalous.
Every week, Heather will bring you an unapologetic take on the headlines, the trends, and the cultural moments everyone's texting about.
And Terry will deliver insider beauty, health, and wellness insights you won't find on TikTok.
Together, we'll tell the stories, spill the secrets, and share the hacks that keep life, marriage, and everything in between feeling fresh and fun.
We may live in a gated community, but there's zero gatekeeping here.
And plenty of did they just say that moments?
Listen to Between Us on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Segregation in the day, integration at night.
When segregation was the law, one mysterious black club owner had his own rules.
We didn't worry about what went on outside. It was like stepping in another world.
Inside Charlie's place, black and white people danced together. But not everyone was happy about it.
You saw the KKK?
Yeah, they was dressed up in their uniform.
The KKK set out to raid Charlie, take him away from here.
Charlie was an example of power. They had to crush him.
From Atlas Obscura, Rococo Punch, and Visit Myrtle Beach comes Charlie's Place. A story that was nearly lost to time. Until now. Listen to Charlie's Place on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You know Roald Dahl, the writer who thought up Willy Wonka, Matilda, and the BFG. But did you know he was also a spy?
Was this before he wrote his stories? It must have been.
Our new podcast series, The Secret World of Roald Dahl, is a wild journey through the hidden chapters of his extraordinary, controversial life.
His job was literally to seduce the wives of powerful Americans.
What?
And he was really good at it.
You probably won't believe it either.
Okay, I don't think that's true.
I'm telling you, the guy was a spy.
Did you know Dahl got cozy with the Roosevelts, played poker with Harry Truman, and had a long affair with a congresswoman? And then he took his talents to Hollywood, where he worked alongside Walt Disney and Alfred Hitchcock before writing a hit James Bond film. How did this secret agent wind up as the most successful children's author ever? And what darkness from his covert past seeped into the stories we read as kids? The true story is stranger than anything he ever wrote. Listen to The Secret World of Roald Dahl on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Anna Navarro, and on my new podcast, Bleep with Anna Navarro, I'm talking to the people closest to the biggest issues happening in your community and around the world. Because I know deep down inside right now, we are all cursing and asking what the bleep is going on. I'm talking to people like Julie K. Brown, who broke the explosive story on Jeffrey Epstein in 2018. These victims have been let down time and time again for decades and decades and decades by local law enforcement, by federal law enforcement, by administration after administration.
The Justice Department, through, I think we counted 4 presidential administrations, failed these victims.
Listen to Bleep with Anna Navarro as part of the My Cultura podcast network. Available on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. Oh, we're having a good time.
Jesus.
So, INS agents were also caught supplying Mexican prostitutes to congressmen and judges in exchange for political favors. Over time, the Border Patrol found ways to get over their long-standing conflicts with Texan ranchers. In numerous cases, they worked out deals with ranch owners whereby they would hold off on immigration raids until right before payday, giving ranchers the use of migrant bodies without the need to pay them. Border Patrol men got to hunt and fish for free on their ranches as payment. So this is kind of how they worked out that little set of disagreements, that little the uprising in Texas that had been sparked by
so they would
a lot of this.
Exploit the labor and then have an agreement with the Border Patrol and be like, okay, seize them on this day.
Yeah,
so that I don't have to pay. Oh my God.
It's good. Yeah, Crudson, that New York Times journalist, even documented that one of the ranches Border Patrol worked out an arrangement with was owned by President Lyndon B. Johnson while he was president.
Holy shit.
Good stuff. Between 1985 and 1990, federal agents gunned down 22 migrants just in the area around San Diego. The Intercept reports, quote, on April 18th, 1986, for instance, patroller Edward Cole was beating 14-year-old Eduardo Carrillo Estrada on the U.S. side of the border's chain-link fence when he stopped and shot Eduardo's younger brother, Humberto, in the back. Humberto was standing on the other side of the fence on Mexican soil. A court ruled that Cole, who had previous incidents of shooting through the fence at Mexicans, had reason to fear for his life from Humberto and used justifiable force. Such abuses persisted through the 1990s and 2000s. In 1993, the House Subcommittee on International Law, Immigration, and Refugees held hearings on Border Patrol abuse, and its transcript is a catalog of horrors. One former guard, Turney Hefner, at the INS Detention Center in Port Isabel, Texas, reported that a young Salvadoran girl was forced to perform personal duties like dancing the lambada for INS officials. In 2011, Hefner published a memoir with more accusations of sexual abuse by, as Hefner writes, the INS brass. Roberto Martinez, who worked with the San Diego-based U.S.-Mexico border program for the American Friends Service Committee, testified that human and civil rights violations by the Border Patrol run the gamut of abuses imaginable, from rape to murder. Agents regularly seized original birth certificates and green cards from Latino citizens, leaving the victim with the financial burden of having to go through a lengthy process of applying for a new document. Rapes and sexual abuse in INS detention centers around the United States, Martinez said, seem to be escalating throughout the border region.
Okay, I have to talk through something here. So, in theory, law enforcement is there to prevent crime, stop crime, find criminals, etc. We know that that's barely what they do, right? But that's, in theory, the purpose of law enforcement. And so by extension, Border Patrol, if it is since it is for some reason illegal to, cross a border undocumented or without the proper documentation, that is, quote, a crime according to ridiculous standards, right? And I also understand, in theory, the concept of punishing things that are actual crime. That makes sense to me as long as it's done responsibly, which it never is. The idea of seeing crossing a border without the proper documentation and deciding that the punishment for that crime warrants things like human trafficking, murder, sexual assault, all manner of other horrible, unmentionable things. Like, it is the most disgusting thing.
I think the problem here that you're having is in thinking that the purpose is ever to prevent crime, whereas the reality is the purpose is to protect whiteness.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, and it's to provide an outlet for fascists in this country to do horrible violence on people in a way that is, rather than being disorganized and sort of being anti-state and being something that like causes disorder, being violence that they are allowed to carry out that enforces the kind of the state itself, that backs up the existence of the state.
Right.
Like you have all these tremendously violent people, right? And you can do a couple of things to them, but they're there. So either you try to like deal with them and de-radicalize them and make them less dangerous, you kill them, or as we do, you give them guns and make them unaccountable and allow them to do horrible violence to large groups of people who have no political agency.
Yes, that is exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It's like people who are like, well, the general population thinks that, you know, being a member of a hate group like the KKK is bad. So I'm going to do the same exact things that the KKK does, but it's being masked as a government agency. Like basically this terrorist organization, this hate group is protected and, quote, justified because it is a government agency, even though they're committing the same heinous acts in the name of, under the guise of some kind of protection, but truly it's the, like you said, protection of whiteness and criminalizing being not white. And
and that's the only way it's ever been.
Yes.
And that's the only way it ever will be, as long as we have a border, and we consider there to be some sort of fundamental value in the sanctity of that border.
Right.
And that's good.
I want to cry about it.
Yeah, it's good to do that sometimes. Other times, it's good to continue reading a podcast script.
Yes.
Which I will now do.
Okay.
Because this is how I deal with problems.
Mm-hmm.
This is the only way that I deal with problems, is by reading podcast scripts.
I mean, informing the people helps.
Yeah, that's a way that you can describe this, is informing the people. I don't know. You know, in 1979, Maria Contreras, 9 months pregnant, crossed back into the United States from Mexico legally after shopping for food. Border Patrol agents found this suspicious, and they tortured her to try to get her to reveal information about undocumented migrants. She died under interrogation, leaving 6 children behind. This sort of thing happened all the time. You know, we have documentation about Maria Contreras' case, but this is maybe even a daily matter, and it's something that continues to this day in dark and terrifying corners of the border where such things are not documented most of the time, but which we all pay for. Throughout all of this, the Border Patrol and INS were sort of the redheaded stepchild of federal agencies with law enforcement powers. They were barely funded because, if you can imagine this, illegal immigration was not something people cared about. So for most of this period, while all of the horrible things we've been talking about have been happening, Border Patrol has basically no money, and very few agents, considering like what it's supposed to be watching in its purview. It's just kind of a place where we keep all of our most violent law enforcement officers, and they don't have the money to do much, but nobody's watching them, so they can carry out horrific acts of violence. And that's the Border Patrol, and really INS too, for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Border states probably had, border states had debates on the matter of illegal immigration. It was certainly like, a political issue in Texas and New Mexico and stuff. But random people in Duluth, random Americans in Duluth or, Wichita or Bumblefuck, Montana or whatever, didn't really care about the border, right? 80s and 90s, it was not a big vote getter for most of that period of time. Now, at the start of the Clinton administration, there were only about 4,000 Border Patrol agents watching both Canada and Mexico, which is not a lot if you think about how big both of those borders are.
They're many miles long.
Yeah, they're pretty big. In 1993, NAFTA became a thing, the North American Free Trade thingamajigger. And illegal immigration grew by leaps and bounds, alongside right-wing fear-mongering about illegal immigration. The Border Patrol more than doubled in size by the turn of the millennium. So this is like the first thing that really leads to a massive surge in the Border Patrol, is NAFTA becomes a thing, and suddenly a shitload more people are trying to cross the border. Illegal immigration by the end of the 1990s is a major national political issue, and the Border Patrol more than doubles under Clinton. In the year 2000, our nation's peak year for illegal immigration, Border Patrol agents apprehended 1.6 million people. This, though, was just a fraction of the total that got through. Border Patrol agents were unhappy about the fact that most undocumented migrants were still getting through the border, and that there were many rules in place to stop them from, doing Operation Wetback type stuff and basically carrying out an ethnic cleansing to get rid of non-white people from border areas. From an article in Politico, quote, near the top of the Border Patrol's list of complaints was the policy known internally as CARP, or the Catch and Release Policy. By the end of the Clinton administration, 80% of people who were caught and released with a notice to appear at a deportation hearing never showed up in court. But despite millions of border crossings, the Border Patrol had the financing in 2001 for just 60 detainees a day across the entire country. They could turn themselves in and have a high confidence that they wouldn't be returned to their home countries, recalls Michael Chertoff, who would go on to become President George W. Bush's second Secretary of Homeland Security. Mostly agents just asked border violators for their names and then did a cursory background check before returning them to Mexico or releasing them into the United States. Sometimes they ran fingerprints, sometimes they didn't. In June 1999, agents captured one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives, a rapist and serial killer named Angel Maturino Resendez, a.k.a. the Railway Killer, and unknowingly released him back into Mexico, whereupon Resendez promptly sneaked back into the United States and murdered 4 more people before being apprehended by Texas Rangers. So, the story of the Railway Killer was, of course, used to justify the need for more funding to the Border Patrol.
Mm-hmm.
What the whole story really illustrates is that even when the Border Patrol had occasional chances to actually protect Americans by apprehending people, they were as likely to fuck up as anything because most of them were shit-ass incompetent in anything besides doing violence.
Mm-hmm.
So, 9/11 happens. You remember 9/11?
I remember.
It's good. You're not supposed to forget it. Now, 9/11 happens, and if you were alive and cognizant at the time, you might remember that basically everybody and their grandma was obsessed with the imminent possibility that Al-Qaeda might drive a regiment of terrorist nuclear tanks or whatever across the Texas border. As someone who lived in Texas at the time, there were a bunch of people freaking out about how, like, terrorist hit squads were going to be making their way up through the border. Kids at my, like, suburban Texas high school were certain that Al-Qaeda was going to be sending people to shoot up our school because, like... Plano, Texas was real high on fucking Osama bin Laden's hit list.
Wait, did they think they were going to like go to Mexico first and then cross the border? Is that what they thought?
Yeah, it didn't really scan a lot. I mean, I'll say this. I think that it's maybe not talked about enough, the degree to which guys like John Milnius and movies like Red Dawn prepared everybody to believe the bullshit the Bush administration said about how terrorists were going to be sneaking through the border. But, like, yeah, whatever. It was very dumb. It was a very dumb time. But also, like, you know, a bunch of guys had worked together to ram planes into the Pentagon and destroy 2 skyscrapers in New York City. People were willing to believe a lot of terrible things were possible. And because the border, you know, right-wing pundits had been convincing everybody that the border was this dangerous and unmonitored place for so long, people were like, oh, my God, of course the terrorists will try there. They never did. But, you know, they still might. Any day now, Caitlin. Any day Al-Qaeda's got to finally get a squad up there. Nobody will notice all of the Anyway, whatever. Tom Ridge, the former governor of Pennsylvania, was made President Bush's Homeland Security czar. Now, this was before the Department of Homeland Security existed. That came about in like November of 2002. But as soon as like 9/11 is a thing, Bush is like, oh, we got to have somebody whose job is to think about safety for the country, which like there were already a bunch of people doing that and it hadn't helped. But anyway, whatever. Right. So Tom Ridge is made the czar of Homeland Security, and he made border control one of his priorities. He realized pretty much immediately that the Border Patrol was going to be an issue for him. Robert Bonner, who worked with Ridge and later became the first head of Customs and Border Patrol, told Politico, quote, "Within the INS structure, they were the poor stepchild. That was how most of INS viewed them at every level. They weren't appreciated and weren't viewed with respect, and that created this defensiveness and insularity within the Border Patrol." There was a lot of debate about what to do with the organization and whether or not to just take all the different groups that handled various border-related things and merge them into one border agency. But that would have meant several different cabinet secretaries would have each lost tiny amounts of power and money because, you have this group that's like, your job is to look for war criminals who might have like accidentally gotten citizenship or green cards. You have this other group, his job is to handle customs enforcement. You have the Border Patrol. You have the group that's job is to go around and look for people who might be violating immigration law. You have all these different groups that are under different sort of people's purview, and putting them all in one organized Border Patrol that does everything would have meant that all of the different cabinet secretaries lost a little bit of money and power. So they all vetoed that idea in unison. No, fuck that shit. Instead, the decision was made to dissolve INS and put the Border Patrol under the purview of the new Customs and Border Patrol, which would itself be part of the brand new Department of Homeland Security. The final nail in INS's coffin was the fact that the agency had approved visas for 2 of the 9/11 hijackers after 9/11. So this is kind of what that's the wrong time to do that. Somebody probably should have gotten on the phone immediately after that and been like, hey, we should run these names. Just make sure we're not going to embarrass everybody. Mm-hmm. But they did. And when the news kind of came out that INS had approved visas for 2 of the people who had just carried out the biggest terrorist attack in U.S. history, the Bush administration was really not happy with INS. Mm-hmm. And that kind of spelled their doom. And in fact, when they dissolved the agency, no one from the White House even thought to call the INS commissioner and tell him. Yeah. I'm going to quote again from Politico's article. INS was such a broken bureaucracy that it would be the single agency in the entire U.S. government to receive the ultimate death penalty after 9/11 in the wide-ranging bureaucratic reorganization that led to the Department of Homeland Security. INS was completely disbanded, its responsibilities removed from the Justice Department, and its duties reassigned among 3 new DHS agencies: Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, Citizenship and Immigration Services, CIS, and Customs and Border Protection, CBP, and the newly created DHS would be a reality in less than a year. So that's the situation. Now, the man tasked with creating the CBP was Robert Bonner, a federal judge and a former DEA head. His first and most pressing decision was whether or not to change the agency's famous green uniform, which is obviously more important than the rapes and the trading of women for sports tickets and stuff.
Why is that the first order of business? Why are there any orders of business?
Look, Caitlin, these brave men of the Border Patrol, who only occasionally commit mass rape and sex trafficking that includes sex trafficking of 12-year-olds, and only occasionally torture pregnant women to death, those brave men have a lot of pride in their uniform, and they want to know that uniform's not going to change.
They have to be presentable. That's the most important thing.
The most important thing is that they get to still feel like they're part of the old Border Patrol that they love. The old Border Patrol that lets them torture all those people and throw kids into dank freezing cells for months on end, many of whom are actually American citizens. That's just how it's important,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So. From Politico, quote, weeks before the new agency officially launched on March 1st, 2003, he invited all of the Border Patrol's 20 sector chiefs to Washington to discuss the transition. They all arrived in D.C. in full dress green uniforms, shoes polished, brass buttons gleaming. As Bonner walked into the room, everyone stood and snapped to attention. The new commissioner began his remarks simply. The Border Patrol will remain green. The room erupted in applause and cheers. They're proud of the green. They were very proud of that uniform, Bonner recalls today. They were concerned about losing that identity.
Ew.
Who cares about your green uniform?
Oh, the Border Patrol cares.
Fuck off and
fucking losers. Fucking
See, this
nerds.
is why,
What the fuck?
as I've always said, and Sophie can back me up on this,
Sure.
Caitlin, you would be a terrible head of the Border Patrol.
because I don't respect the green.
Exactly.
Well, I don't even.
You don't understand how
I don't
important
wear
this is.
green, but it's because I hate the Celtics. So I couldn't have a job either.
Okay.
Yeah, see, Sophie, you'd be bad at this too,
attacking Boston
because
for
as
no
a Border
reason?
Patrol agent, you should be trading kidnapped women to the Celtics in exchange for season tickets.
Oh my God! Can we just go to an ad break? Jesus Christ!
Speaking of the Celtics, you know who else supports this podcast?
Hey! You know who else is Nope.
Yep. Products
and services.
And we're back.
That Celtics dig. I just would like to denote that I will keep doing that, and also high prop.
Yeah, it's I don't understand who the Celtics are. Celtics, I don't understand any of this. This is all Sophie's fault. If you love that team, send your death threats to Sophie.
Yeah,
if
you love that team, just unfollow me because we will never be friends. Also,
because I don't know who they
once
are.
again, high prop.
Soccer.
If you don't give a shit about any
Highlight?
sports teams in existence,
tennis maybe
follow me.
Yeah,
except for soccer. Soccer is allowed. Soccer's cool. Soccer's the only sport I
No,
respect.
soccer's definitely not allowed.
What? Robert?
Soccer's allowed.
There is one sport allowed in my ideal world, and it's that game they play in Afghanistan where they all ride around on horseback with a goat head, and people get killed sometimes because that's
You just
the good
you
game.
just fully Roberted this entire thing. Anyways, follow Caitlin on Twitter and Instagram. She's a great follow. Continue with your podcast.
And go to Afghanistan to play sports. Anyway, they were not particularly concerned, the Border Patrol, with making any changes to reduce the number of migrants killed by Border Patrol agents. Since 2003, Border Patrol agents have killed at least 97 people. 6 of those people were children. They've also taken repeated action to stop other people from saving lives. As summers grew more brutal, more and more migrants started dying in the Sonoran Desert. In 2004, the faith-based organization No More Deaths started leaving gallon jugs of water out near common footpaths in the desperate hope that it might stop a few people from dying horribly in the desert. They soon noticed that their water bottles were being slashed open. No More Deaths set up hidden cameras. They found, in every case, Border Patrol agents destroying water caches, almost with visible glee. You can see one of these videos for yourself in the PBS documentary Need to Know. Salon.com's description is quite good. Quote, 3 Border Patrol agents, 2 men and a woman, are walking along a migrant trail and approaching a half a dozen 1-gallon jugs of water. The female agent stops in front of the containers and begins to kick them with force down a ravine. The bottles crash against rocks, bursting open. She's smiling. One of the agents watching her smiles as well, seeming to take real pleasure in the spectacle. He says something under his breath, and the word tonk is clearly audible. Do you know what tonk means?
I don't.
So we talked about wetback in episode 1 and how that was the Border Patrol's kind of old term for particularly Mexican immigrants because of the river they have to cross. Tonk is the new slur that the Border Patrol uses for undocumented immigrants. And it comes from the sound that a flashlight makes when you hit someone in the head.
Oh my God.
You'll hear this if in any article you read about the modern Border Patrol that the word tonk is like their standard term for migrants, and it's a term because of what it sounds like when they beat these people with flashlights.
Wow. Okay, let me just process that.
New slurs were, of course, far from the only changes to hit Border Patrol during the Bush years. By the time President Obama took office, the Border Patrol had gone from an underfunded force of about 9,000 to a 21,000-person army, the largest federal law enforcement agency in the country. There are actual armies smaller than the Border Patrol and less well-equipped. They're the largest law enforcement agency in the country now. So that's good. All those new officers had to be trained up quick, and this did not leave time for rigorous vetting and background checking that other federal agents go through. Border Patrol agents today still have the least average years of experience of any federal law enforcement agency. They also have the lowest standards for new recruits. This may have something to do with the fact that Border Patrol agents are involved in more fatal shootings than any other federal law enforcement agency. Yeah. Probably. It's not like any federal law enforcement agency is good about giving us numbers about how many people they shoot, but probably they kill more than any of the others.
Okay, I believe it.
Yeah. One senior DHS official even admitted to Politico, quote, "The agency has created a culture that says, if you throw a rock at me, you're going to get shot." Between 2005 and 2012, roughly one CBP officer was arrested for misconduct every single day. During President Obama's first term, things got so bad that DHS Secretary Janet Napolitano ordered the CBP to change its institutional definition of the word corruption so they wouldn't have to admit to as many problems when they were questioned by Congress about all of the murders. It's yeah.
Wow.
Again,
what
under
a
Obama.
workaround.
Under Obama.
Yeah.
It's pretty much impossible.
No, I just,
yeah.
Yeah.
Like, we're not even really going to get into the Trump years in this two-parter because that's like a whole nother thing to start talking about. Yeah.
Sure.
Like, most of this that we're talking about today, I mean, it's Reagan, Bush Sr., Clinton, Bush Jr., and Obama, right? Those are the guys that this is happening under. Those are the guys funding this, right? Enthusiastically.
Right.
All of the politicians that everybody thinks are fine now because Trump is such a dick. Anyway, yeah, it's pretty much impossible to exaggerate how bad Border Patrol is and was. I'm going to guess that most of our listeners come from a broad position that like feds are not good, which is fine and accurate. But even among that company, like even if you're like, oh, federal agents are pretty much all bad, it's shocking how bad the agents of the CBP are. Like it's like it's staggering how shitty they particularly become in the aughts. And I'm going to quote from Salon again. There was the Miami CBP officer who used his law enforcement status to bypass airport security and personally smuggle cocaine and heroin into Miami. There was the green uniformed agent in Yuma, Arizona, who was caught smuggling 700 pounds of marijuana across the border in his green and white Border Patrol truck. The brand new 26-year-old Border Patrol agent who joined a drug smuggling operation to distribute more than 1,000 kilograms of marijuana in Del Rio, Texas. The 32-year-old Border Patrol agent whose wife would tip him off on which buses filled with illegal immigrants to let through his checkpoint on I-35 in Laredo, Texas. Some cases were more obvious than others, like the new Border Patrol agent who took an unusual interest in maps of the agency's sensors along the border and was arrested just 7 months into the job after he sold smugglers those maps for $5,500. In November 2007, CBP official Thomas Winkowski wrote an agency-wide memo citing numerous incidents, or as he called them, disturbing events, saying that the leadership was concerned about the increase in the number of employee arrests. The memo, never made public but obtained by the Miami Herald, reminded officers and agents, it is our responsibility to uphold the laws, not break the law. Now, right around that time, internal CBP investigations uncovered that the agency had, in dozens of cases, hired members of Mexican drug cartels and gangs like MS-13 to be agents. They'd also hired at least one serial killer, Juan David Ortiz, who murdered 5 women during his time as an intelligence analyst for the agency. He is also suspected of kidnapping a woman. We'll never really know the exact extent of his crimes, and in that regard, he fits in with another Border Patrol veteran, Esteban Manzanares. It is possible that Esteban Manzanares was not a serial killer. He hasn't been convicted of any murders, but he was caught abducting 3 migrant women, a mother and her 2 teenage daughters. He attempted to bury one alive, and he raped another. And yeah, earlier this year, an appeals court ruled that his victims could not sue the federal government as Manzanares was not acting in his official capacity as a Border Patrol agent when he assaulted those women. Sure, he arrested them during his duties as a Border Patrol agent, and he took them to a Border Patrol processing facility before taking them to a gated compound to assault them, but he wasn't acting as a Border Patrol agent.
Oh, wow. The mental gymnastics that people do.
Just legal ones.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Now, the good news is that a few bad apples like Manzanares and Ortiz and also all of the thousands of agents who got arrested on a nearly daily basis for 7 straight years didn't stop the orchard from detaining more migrants than ever before. During the Obama years, DHS deported more undocumented migrants than ever. $400,000 a year. As President Obama said in 2011, the presence of so many illegal immigrants make a mockery of all those who are trying to immigrate legally. Now, yeah, that's good.
Obama.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool what a problem this was. So, and again, all of these illegal immigrants make a mockery of everyone trying to immigrate illegally. The data shows that during this period, this like fucking 7-year period, an average of 1 Border Patrol agent per day almost was arrested for serious crimes, like ranging from like rape and sexual assault to attempted murder, to drug smuggling. Like every day, a Border Patrol agent basically was getting arrested during these years. But that's not making a mockery of like
right.
law enforcement or whatever. Yeah. Yeah. Now, there were a number of reasons why things got so bad in Border Patrol. We've talked about some of them, just sort of like the inherent racist nature of the existence of the Border Patrol.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also just sort of some reasons that you would describe as kind of broadly bureaucratic. There were a bunch of bureaucratic reasons why it happened too, right? Kind of outside of the inherent, problems of policing a border. Sure. For one point, like they were increasing the size of the Border Patrol faster than any law enforcement agency had ever been increased. And that meant bringing in a shitload of people who weren't qualified. They had all of this money and they did not have enough people who could actually responsibly do the job. So they were just throwing people in chairs and giving them guns and badges. Now, the issues of hiring a bunch of people for an agency based on assaulting non-white people and giving them, broad powers were compounded by structural problems within the way the Border Patrol was set up. Most Border Patrol men are agents. This differs from special agents, which are the cool dudes like Fox Mulder that everyone who becomes a Fed wants to be. Special agents can both arrest people and investigate crimes. Agents only have arresting powers. They cannot investigate crimes. Now, because CBP is seen as the shittiest federal law enforcement agency, the dumping ground for all of the violent assholes, our government doesn't like to make them special agents. According to Politico, quote, "In many ways, the difference between the two is CBP's original sin, a seemingly minor technical distinction made in the harried heat of DHS creation a decade ago that would allow hundreds of cases of corruption in CBP's Office of Field Operations and use of force abuses in the Border Patrol to fester for years. The problem was that no one at CBP received what's known as 1811 authority. When DHS was set up, ICE was given exclusive 1811 authority to conduct investigations in the border region. CBP was only given so-called 1801 authority, a lesser classification that allowed Border Patrol agents and customs officers to make arrests and enforce federal law, but not investigate. They could be cops, but not detectives. This didn't particularly matter in the daily performance of CBP's duties. The borders were patrolled, the ports of entry watched, except that CBP was legally prohibited from policing its own workforce." Yeah. And it's, again, one of these things every single person who's ever been involved in running the CBP agrees, like, yeah, this is a real big problem. Because it means that they're even less accountable than other law enforcement agencies.
And those ones are barely accountable.
And those ones are barely accountable. But like even when Border Patrol agents commit a crime that other Border Patrol agents think is horrible, like they can't investigate.
Wow. No accountability. Holy crap.
Yeah, other law enforcement agencies look at Border Patrol and go, Jesus Christ, those people are unaccountable when they commit acts of unspeakable violence.
That is bleak. It's bleak. Very bleak.
By 2012, the problems in Border Patrol were obvious enough that they spilled out into the public's sphere. The Arizona Republic conducted an investigation which showed that agents had killed at least 42 people, 13 of whom were citizens, since 2005. In none of these killings was any agent known to have faced consequences of any kind. Congressional pressure forced the agency to submit to an investigation by the Police Executive Research Forum, a Washington, D.C.-based law enforcement think tank. The PERF investigated 67 cases of lethal force by Border Patrol agents. They found, among other things, cases of agents firing at fleeing vehicles. The report concluded, too many cases do not appear to meet the test of objective reasonableness with regard to the use of deadly force. The PERF report advised, among other things, that agents should not use lethal force on unarmed drivers or rock throwers. The agency rejected this out of hand, with the head of Border Patrol saying in an interview, "I've known agents who have almost died from being rocked along the border, and I think it was completely ridiculous that they wanted that prohibition." I should note here that no Border Patrol officer has ever been killed by a rock, and I can't really find evidence of one being seriously injured by a rock either. What I can find is that, in 2014, CBP leadership estimated a full 20% of their force was corrupt. Attempts at reform were made in the last 2 years of the Obama administration, and in 2016, it looked like things might finally be headed in a less murdery direction. But then Donald Trump became the president, and here we are. A presidential administration filled with literal Nazis was handed a vast, heavily armed force of sociopaths and rapists who just spent the last 2 years being told that they had to rape and murder less, and then all of a sudden they were told, whatever you want to do is fine, just get these brown people out of the United States. And that's kind of where things stand today, with the Border Patrol as sort of the turning into the official armed wing of the racist right, with these CBP and BORTAC units set up using Border Patrol men being sent into American cities to police dissent because they're the most dedicated and least accountable and most violent law enforcement officers the country has. And yeah, there's a lot more I could and should get into about where things are at the moment with Border Patrol, but this is... It took me this long just to get us up to the fucking Trump administration.
Right. And yeah, we're not even at the, the frenzy around build the wall and just like, yeah. So
yeah,
guess that's another podcast.
Yeah, it's another kind of podcast. And I guess if I'm going to leave somewhere, or in this somewhere, it would probably be good to end by talking again about Harlan Carter for just a little bit. Do you remember Harlan Carter? He was the former Border Patrol head who was in charge during Operation Wetback and who was a convicted murderer. In 1931, he shot a Mexican boy in the chest. So yeah, the young Mexican boy that he murdered was named Raymond Casiano. And there's actually a really good song about the Border Patrol and about Raymond Casiano by a band I quite like called Drive-By Truckers. And there's a line in it about Harlan Carter, this former head of the Border Patrol, who goes on, by the way, to become the head of the NRA and is like one of the guys in charge of the NRA when it turns into the NRA we all know today, from the organization that was like, oh, people should learn how to shoot accurately so they can hunt deer, right? Like the NRA used to just be like a pretty normal thing, and then it turns into this crazy thing that it is today, this quasi-military, or not quasi-military, but like this explicitly fascist organization urging political violence. Anyway, Harlan Carter is the guy behind that too.
So not somebody we'd want to get a drink with.
Not somebody you'd want to get a drink with. And there's a couple lines about him in this song, Raymond Casiano, which is named after the guy that Harlan Carter killed. And it's a song, really about not just Harlan Carter, but about the kind of men who become Border Patrol agents. He had the makings of a leader of a certain kind of men who need to feel the world's against him, out to get him if it can. Men whose trigger pull their fingers, of men who'd rather fight than win, united in a revolution, like in mind and like in skin.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good song.
I'll give it a listen.
So, Caitlin, you wanna plug your pluggables?
Sure. Well, thank you for enlightening me with this information. A lot of it I did not know, so I appreciate now knowing. Depressing and upsetting though it may be, it's good to be informed. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Caitlin Durante, and you can check out my podcast on this network called the Bechtel Cast. So, that little conversation that Sophie and I had at the beginning was a reference to that. We talk about the representation of women in film, and check it all out.
Check it all out.
And you can follow Robert on Twitter at iWriteOK. You can follow this podcast on Twitter and Instagram at BastardsPod. You can now email us at behindthebastards@iheartmedia.com. And you can buy merch at our TeePublic store. You can also buy merch from Caitlin and Jamie's TeePublic store, which has some of my absolute favorite items in the entire planet.
Feminist icon.
How's that for a plug?
That was
Speaking
great.
of
Thank you, Sophie.
feminist icons, you know who else is a feminist icon?
I can't wait to see who you
Oh,
say.
dear
Caitlin Durante.
Oh,
thank you.
Yep. All right.
This ended
I'm
very,
done.
very, 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 very warmly.
Thank you.
That's the episode. Bye, guys.
That is the motherfucking episode.
Bye.
Behind the Bastards is a production of Cool Zone Media. For more from Cool Zone Media, visit our website, coolzonemedia.com, or check us out on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Behind the Bastards is now available on YouTube. New episodes every Wednesday and Friday. Subscribe to our channel, youtube.com/@BehindTheBastards.
Then she says, have you seen a photo of my son? And I'm like, who is this person?
Welcome to the Boys and Girls Podcast. Arranged marriage is basically a reality show, and you're auditioning for your soulmate. And who's judging? Only your entire family. I sacrificed myself to this ancient tradition, hoping to find love the right way. And instead, I found chaos, comedy, and a lot of cringe. Listen to Boys and Girls on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You know Roald Dahl. He thought up Willy Wonka and the BFG. But did you know he was a spy? In the new podcast, The Secret World of Roald Dahl, I'll tell you that story and much, much more.
What?
You probably won't believe it either.
Was this before he wrote his stories? It must have been.
Okay, I don't think that's true.
I'm telling you, the guy was a spy.
Listen to The Secret World of Roald Dahl on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, son. Time to put out this campfire.
Dad, we learned about this in school.
Oh, did you now? Okay. What's first?
Smokey Bear said to.
First, drown it with a bucket of water, then stir it with a shovel.
Wow, you sound just like him.
Then he said.
If it's still warm, then do it again.
Where can I learn all this?
It's all on SmokeyBear.com with other wildfire prevention tips. Because only you can prevent wildfires.
Brought to you by the USDA Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
When segregation was a law, one mysterious black club owner, Charlie Fitzgerald, had his own rules.
Segregation in the day, integration at night.
It was like stepping in another world.
Was he a businessman, a criminal, a hero?
Charlie was an example of power. They had to crush him.
Charlie's Place, from Atlas Obscura and Visit Myrtle Beach. Listen to Charlie's Place on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.